Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto's cooking was so divine it made every woman who tasted it join his harem? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Taste of a Forgotten Sun. The water in the cup was cold. Naruto Uzumaki stared into its clear depths, watching the distorted reflection of his own face quiver on the surface. Outside, Konohagakure W, as alive with the familiar sounds of a village settling in for the evening. The laughter of children chasing each other down the street, the murmur of conversation from the windows of neighboring apartments. The distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer calling it a day. They were the sounds of a world he could see and hear but never quite touch. They were background noise to the profound, ringing silence of his small, sparse apartment. His gaze drifted from the cup to the room itself. It was clean, meticulously so, because there was little in it to make a mess. A small bed was pushed against one wall, its blanket folded with military precision. A low table sat in the center of the floor, its surface bare save for the cup of water and a single, sealed pot of instant ramen. A rickety wardrobe stood in the corner. That was it. No pictures on the walls, no trinkets on the windowsill, no signs that a life was being lived here beyond the basic functions of survival. It was less a home and more a waiting room for a life that had yet to begin. His stomach growled, a low, hollow ache that was as familiar as the whispers that followed him through the streets. He reached for the ramen, his fingers tracing the cheap plastic lid. It was the chicken flavor tonight. Yesterday had been miso. The day before, pork. A thrilling rotation of powdered disappointments. He peeled back the lid, the crink. Of the plastic loud in the quiet room. He stood, walked to the small kitchenette, and turned the tap. The gush of water was a roar. He wasn't sad. Sadness was a luxury, a deep and complicated emotion for people who had something to lose. Naruto had a different state of being, a constant, thrumming awareness of the invisible wall between himself and everyone else. He was a ghost at the feast, a smudge on the pristine painting of the village. He saw the way the villagers' eyes would slide past him, refusing to meet his gaze. He heard the way their pleasant conversations would stutter into silence when he rounded a corner. He felt the chill that settled over a shop when he entered, an unspoken plea for him to finish his business and leave. He poured the hot water into the cup, the steam rising to mist his face. 3 minutes. The most important 3 minutes of his day. He sat back down at the table, his blue eyes fixed on the lid as if he could will the noodles to cook faster. It was this moment, this brief anticipation. That was the best part of the meal. In these 3 minutes, the ramen was perfect. It held the promise of being warm, of filling the void in his stomach. It was only after he took the first bite that the familiar taste of salt and preservatives would remind him of what it truly was. Cheap, empty, and solitary. A sudden commotion from the street below broke his vigil. A man's voice, sharp and cold as honed steel, cut through the evening air. It was a voice that demanded obedience, a voice accustomed to wielding power like a blade. Naruto found himself moving to the window, drawn by a curiosity that momentarily overrode his hunger. He peered down into the street, which was now cast in the long shadows of twilight. He saw them immediately, standing starkly under the orange glow of a street lamp. The head of the Hyuga clan, Hiashi, stood ramrod straight, his featureless white eyes fixed on the small, trembling figure before him. His daughter, Hinata. Even from his window, Naruto could see the rigid set of Hiashi's jaw, the utter lack of warmth in his posture. You failed again, Hinata. Hiashi's voice was not loud, but it carried with a chilling clarity. Your movements are hesitant. Your strikes lack conviction. You possess the Byakugan, the most powerful eyes in this village, and yet you fight with the timidness of a field mouse. It is an insult to our bloodline. Hinata's head was bowed, her dark hair hiding her face. Her shoulders shook with suppressed sobs. I am sorry, father. I was trying. Trying is not sufficient, he interrupted, his tone merciless. The heir to the Hyuga clan does not try. She succeeds. Your sister, Hanabi, 5 years your junior, already displays a grasp of the gentle fist that far exceeds your own. She has the will, the fire. You have only apologies. Each word was a perfectly aimed senbon, striking at the very core of her confidence. Naruto felt a familiar, bitter taste rise in his throat. He knew that look. He knew that feeling. To be judged, weighed, and found wanting, not for something you did, but for what you were. He had seen it in the eyes of the academy instructors, in the glares of the villagers, in the cold indifference of the orphanage matrons. Go back to the training grounds, Hiashi commanded. Do not return to the main house until you can complete the 64 palms sequence without a single error. He turned without another word, his robe sweeping behind him as he walked away, leaving his daughter standing alone in the growing darkness. Hinata remained frozen for a long moment. Then, with a choked sob, she stumbled away, not toward the Hyuga compound, but in the opposite direction, seeking the anonymity of a darkened side street. Naruto watched her go, a strange tightness in his chest. He looked back at his table. The 3 minutes were up. His dinner was ready, but for the first time in a long time, he had completely lost his appetite. The thought of the Thai broth and limp noodles was suddenly nauseating. He couldn't shake the image of Hinata's trembling shoulders from his mind. He didn't think. He acted. It was a raw, unfiltered impulse, the same one that made him paint the Hokage monument or challenge kids twice his size. It was the desperate roar of a boy who refused to be invisible, who refused to accept the silent, lonely world he'd been given. He grabbed his wallet, containing the pitiful remainder of his monthly stipend, and bolted out the door, leaving the perfectly promised ramen to grow cold on his table. He found her huddled on a bench in a small, forgotten park. A place where the swings were rusted and the grass grew in patchy clumps. She had tucked herself into the corner of the bench, trying to make herself as small as possible. As if she could simply fold into herself and disappear. Her silent tears traced clean paths through the dust on her cheeks. Naruto approached cautiously, his usually loud footsteps softened on the overgrown grass. He stood a few feet away, unsure of what to say. The usual loud-mouthed bravado that was his armor felt wrong here. It would be like trying to shout in a library. "Hey," he said, his voice softer than he intended. Hinata flinched violently, her head snapping up. Her pale, tear-filled eyes widened in alarm when she saw him. She looked like a startled rabbit, ready to bolt at the slightest provocation. Naruto-kun," she stammered, hastily wiping at her eyes with the back of her sleeve. I'm sorry to be. You're not anything," he cut her off, shoving his hands in his pockets. He rocked back and forth on his heels, his gaze fixed on a particularly stubborn weed growing through a crack in the pavement. "I saw, your dad." Her breath hitched, and a fresh wave of humiliation washed over her face. To be seen in her moment of weakness, and by him, the class clown, the dead last. It was another failure to add to the list. "It's nothing," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Looked like something to me," Naruto said bluntly. He took a hesitant step closer. "He's wrong, Hinata stared at him, confused. What he said, about you being weak." Naruto finally met her eyes. And his own were startlingly clear, a deep, unwavering blue. "I've seen you train. You never give up. Even when you're losing, even when you're scared, you always get back up. That's not weak. That's the opposite of weak." No one had ever said anything like that to her before. To her family, strength was victory. It was flawless execution. It was power. They had never considered the strength it took to simply endure, to keep trying in the face of constant failure. A fresh tear slipped down her cheek, but this one felt different. It was warmer. Naruto saw the tear and panicked slightly. He was making it worse. He needed to fix this. His brain scrambled for a solution, a way to mend the broken feeling that radiated from her. Words weren't working. What else was there? His mind landed on the most basic, fundamental comfort he had ever known, even in its most pathetic form. "Are you hungry?" he blurted out. The question was so unexpected it startled a small, hiccuping laugh out of her. I am not. I am," he lied, patting his stomach. "Super hungry. And I hate eating alone. It's the worst. My ramen is probably all soggy by now anyway." He took a breath, summoning his courage. "Come on. I'll make you something." Hinata looked at him, truly looked at him, perhaps for the first time. She saw the genuine, awkward earnestness in his eyes. He wasn't making fun of her. He wasn't trying to trick her. He was just offering. In the face of her father's cold rejection, this simple, clumsy gesture of kindness felt like a lifeline. "But, you're home?" she asked. The idea of going to a boy's apartment, especially his apartment, sending a jolt of anxiety through her. "It's not much," he admitted with a shrug, a faint blush on his cheeks. "But it's warm, and I have stuff to cook, probably." Quote. She hesitated for only a moment longer. Then, with a small, shaky nod, she stood up from the bench. "Okay, Naruto-kun." The walk back to his apartment was a study in awkward silence. Naruto kept glancing at her out of the corner of his eye, while Hinata kept her gaze fixed firmly on the ground in front of her, her hands clasped tightly together. When he unlocked his door and pushed it open, he felt a pang of embarrassment at the starkness of the room. He saw it through her eyes now. The bare walls, the single table, the lingering scent of loneliness. "See, told you it wasn't much," he said, trying for a casual tone and failing. Hinata stepped inside, her movements graceful and quiet. She looked around, her pale eyes taking everything in. She saw the lonely cup of ramen, the meticulously folded blanket. She didn't see poverty or neglect. She saw a reflection of her own feelings, a profound, aching solitude. "It is very clean," she said softly, and it was the perfect thing to say. Naruto's shoulders relaxed a fraction. "Yeah, well, nothing to mess it up with." He gestured toward the table. "Have a seat. I'll just see what I've got." He too ran to his kitchenette and felt his heart sink. His grand offer of a meal suddenly seemed pathetic. He looked in his small, mostly empty cupboards. There was a bag of rice, the cheap kind that was more starch than flavor. In his small, humming refrigerator, he found a couple of limp scallions, a single, slightly wrinkled carrot, and a small nub of ginger. That was it. This was not a meal. This was an apology for a meal. He felt a flush of shame. He was going to make her this sad excuse for food after what she'd just been through. It felt like another insult. He gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles turning white. He thought of her father's cold words, of her silent tears in the park. A fierce, protective anger surged through him. No, she deserved better. She deserved warmth. She deserved comfort. He didn't know where the feeling came from. It started in his gut, a low, simmering heat that spread up through his chest and into his hands. It was all the frustration of his own lonely existence. All the empathy he felt for her pain. All his desperate, unspoken yearning to connect with just one person, to offer a moment of solace in a world that felt so cold. It all channeled into a single, overwhelming thought. I will make this meal good. I will make it the most comforting thing she has ever tasted. He took a deep breath and began to work. He washed the rice with a he usually reserved for practicing his transformation jutsu, rubbing the grains between his palms until the water ran clear. As he measured the water into the pot, he wasn't just measuring liquid. He was pouring in a wish for peace, for tranquility. He placed the pot on the stove and turned on the flame. He took the pathetic ingredients and treated them like treasures. He sliced the carrot into impossibly thin, perfect rounds. Each press of the knife was steady, focused. He minced the ginger, releasing its sharp, clean scent into the air. He chopped the scallions into fine green jewels. There was no magic, no flash of chakra. It was just an absolute, unwavering focus, a complete immersion in the task. All of his will, all of his emotion, was being funneled into this simple pot. Hinata sat at the table, watching him. She had never seen him so still, so concentrated. The boisterous, clumsy boy from the academy was gone. In his place was someone else, someone whose movements were deliberate and filled with a strange, quiet grace. A soft, gentle aroma began to fill the small apartment. It wasn't the overpowering scent of a feast, but something much more subtle. It smelled of clean rain, of warm earth, of something pure and wholesome. It was a scent that made the tight knot in her stomach begin to loosen. Naruto didn't notice. He was lost in the process. He tasted the simmering rice porridge, okayu. He vaguely remembered someone calling it. It was bland. It was just rice and water. It needed more. He added a pinch of salt, but it wasn't enough. It needed something. His eyes scanned the kitchen and landed on a small, forgotten bottle in the back of a cupboard. Soy sauce. A gift from the third Hokage that he'd never opened. He added a single, small drop to the pot. He stirred it in, watching the pale porridge swirl with a hint of brown. He tasted it again, and then he stopped. Something had changed. The flavor was deeper. It wasn't just salty. It was savory, complex, a warmth that spread across his tongue. It was like he had unlocked something hidden within the ingredients. Encouraged, he added the ginger and half of the carrots, letting them soften into the porridge. Finally, it was ready. The okayu was a pale, creamy white, dotted with the bright orange of the carrots. He poured it into the only clean bowl he owned, a simple ceramic one, and sprinkled the green scallions on top. He carried it to the table and placed it gently in front of Hinata. He also brought her the cup of water from earlier, now refilled. "It's not much," he mumbled, his focus broken, the awkward boy returning. "It's just rice porridge." Hinata looked down at the bowl. The steam rose in a gentle curl, carrying that soft, comforting scent. It looked so simple, yet there was something about it that felt profound. It felt like a gift. She picked up the spoon he'd set out for her. It was a cheap, slightly bent spoon, but it felt solid in her hand. She dipped the spoon into the porridge and brought it to her lips. She was prepared for the taste of plain rice, of poverty, of a meal made from necessity. The first taste was an explosion. Not an explosion of spice or fire, but of pure, unadulterated warmth. It was the flavor of sunlight. It was the taste of a kind hand on a fevered brow, the feeling of being wrapped in a thick, soft blanket on a cold night. The simple CE tasted richer than any feast she'd ever had at the Hyuga compound. The ginger was not a sharp bite, but a gentle, glowing ember. The carrots were not just sweet, they held the essence of the earth they grew in. The single drop of soy sauce had somehow amplified everything, weaving the simple notes into a complex, harmonious chord of pure comfort. But it was more than just flavor. The moment the porridge touched her tongue, the world dissolved. The drab apartment, the boy sitting nervously across from her, the cold weight of her father's words, it all vanished. She was standing in a field of soft, green grass under a sky of the most brilliant, gentle blue. A sun, warmer and more brilliant than the real one, shone down on her. Its light wasn't harsh or blinding, it was a physical presence. A benevolent warmth that soaked into her skin, into her bones, into the very core of her soul. In this vision, there was no judgment. There were no expectations. There was no gentle fist, no Byakugan, no clan, no failure. There was only the warmth of the sun and the soft grass beneath her feet. A voice, not of words but of pure feeling, washed over her. "You are enough. Your gentleness is not a weakness, it is a deep well of strength. You are cherished." The knot of fear and inadequacy that had lived in her stomach for as long as she could remember, the knot her father had tightened into a choking fist only an hour ago, simply dissolved. It didn't break or shatter. It melted away like snow under the gentle, persistent light of this forgotten sun. The vision faded, leaving her back in the silent apartment. The spoon was still in her hand. The bowl was still warm between her palms. But everything was different. A single tear rolled down her cheek and dripped into the porridge. Then another, and another. Soon, she was crying freely, not with the silent, choked sobs of before, but with deep, cleansing tears of pure release. The grief and pain of years of failure were being washed away. Naruto watched, his heart hammering against his ribs in a panic. "Is it bad? I knew it was bad. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have." "No," she interrupted, her voice thick but steady. She looked up at him, and her eyes, those pale Hyuga eyes, were shining with an intensity he had never seen before. They were clear, focused, and filled with a powerful, unwavering light. For the first time, she was truly seeing him. Not as the village pariah, not as the class clown, but as the creator of the miracle in her hands. It's the most wonderful thing I have ever tasted." She took another bite, and then another. She ate the entire bowl, scraping the sides clean with her spoon. With each bite, the new strength within her solidified. The warmth from the meal didn't fade, it settled deep inside her, a permanent ember in the cold house of her soul. When she was finished, she placed the bowl and spoon neatly on the table. She stood, and for the first time, her posture mirrored her father's. Not in its cold rigidity, but in its unshakable straightness. She was no longer trying to shrink. She bowed to Naruto, a deep, formal bow of profound respect that would have been appropriate for a cage. "Thank you, Naruto-kun," she said, her voice clear and without a single stammer. "You have given me a great gift." Before the stunned Naruto could respond, she turned and walked to the door. She paused, her hand on the knob, and looked back at him. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. "I am going to the training grounds now. I will perfect the 64 palms tonight." And then she was gone. Naruto stood in the middle of his silent apartment, utterly bewildered. He looked at the empty bowl, then at his own hands. What in the world had just happened? It was just rice porridge, wasn't it? The next day at the academy, the whispers started. Hinata Hyuga arrived not with her usual downcast eyes and timid shuffle, but with a serene confidence that turned every head. During taijutsu practice against Kiba, she didn't win. Not in the traditional sense. But she didn't lose, either. Her movements were fluid, precise, and calm. She met Kiba's aggressive fang over fang with a placid, yielding defense that seemed to absorb his momentum, turning his own strength against him until he exhausted himself. She never faltered. Her gaze never wavered. "Whoa, Hinata, what's gotten into you?" Kiba panted, leaning on his knees. Hinata simply smiled her small, serene smile. "Naruto-kun shared a meal with me last night." The statement was so bizarre, so utterly nonsensical, that it hung in the air. Kiba stared, then burst out laughing. Sakura, standing nearby, rolled her eyes. "Right, and I'm sure that idiot's cooking is what made you a taijutsu master overnight." Don't be ridiculous. But the rumor, as ridiculous as it was, had been born. A change had occurred. It was undeniable, and its source, impossibly, was being credited to the village's #1 knucklehead ninja. That night, a short, Ling report was delivered by a masked operative into the shadowy depths of Konoha's foundations. The scroll detailed the sudden, inexplicable improvement in the Hyuga heir's demeanor, confidence, and chakra control. It noted her own bizarre explanation. A single, bandaged eye scanned the words. "An anomaly," a cold, ancient voice rasped from the darkness. "The Jinchuriki's influence is a variable that must be quantified. Continue surveillance. All variables must be controlled." Naruto knew nothing of this. He was back in his apartment, cleaning the single ceramic bowl from the night before. He felt a strange contentment. A warmth that had nothing to do with the setting sun. He had helped someone. He had connected. He went to close his window for the night and paused. On his doorstep sat a small, neatly wrapped package. It wasn't there before. He cautiously picked it up and brought it inside. Untying the simple twine, he opened the paper. Inside was a bag of the highest quality rice he had ever seen, each grain a perfect, pearlescent white. Next to it lay a bundle of crisp, green scallions, 2 vibrant orange carrots, and a small, perfect fillet of sea bream, its skin shimmering under his apartment's single light bulb. There was no note, no indication of who had left it. But he knew. Naruto looked at the bounty before him, then around his empty room. For the first time in his entire life, it didn't feel empty. It felt like a beginning. A genuine smile, bright and wide and full of a light he didn't know he possessed, spread across his face. He didn't understand the what or the why of it. But one thing was suddenly, startlingly clear. His life was about to change. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Aroma of Defiance. The academy classroom buzzed with the nervous energy of freshly minted genin. For the first time, they wore their Hitai-8, the polished metal plates a shining testament to years of hard work. Naruto sat in his usual spot, a grin plastered on his face, his own forehead protector gleaming proudly. He had done it. He was a shinobi. It was the first real step toward his dream, and the feeling was electric. He glanced over at Sakura Haruno, his heart giving a familiar, hopeful flutter. She looked amazing, her pink hair framing the dark blue cloth of her protector. He was about to call out to her when her eyes, bright and full of adoration, fixed on the figure sitting next to him. Sasuke Uchiha. Of course. Sasuke sat there, the very picture of detached indifference, his hands steepled in front of his face, ignoring the entire world with a practiced ease. "I wonder who will be on my team." Sakura gushed to Ino Yamanaka, who was sitting in the row behind her. I just hope it's with someone I'm compatible with. Someone skilled, and cool. Her gaze on Asuke was about as subtle as a thrown kunai. Ino scoffed, flipping her long blonde ponytail over her shoulder. Obviously, I'll be the one on Sasuke-kun's team, billboard brow. Our skills are much more complementary. As their predictable argument escalated, Naruto sank a little in his seat. It was always like this. He was a background character in the drama of Sasuke and his fan club. Still, a flicker of optimism remained. He was a ninja now. Things would be different. They had to be. Iruka-sensei entered, a stack of papers in his hands, and the room fell silent. He cleared his throat and began reading out the team assignments. Naruto's stomach twisted with each name called. Team 10. Ino Yamanaka, Shikamaru Nara, Choji Akamichi. Ino groaned in theatrical despair while Shikamaru muttered, "What a drag." Team 8. Hinata Hyuga, Kiba Inuzuka, Shino Aburame. Naruto saw Hinata give a small, almost imperceptible nod. There was a quiet confidence in the gesture that was new. Kiba whooped, punching the air. And Team 7. Iruka continued, pausing for dramatic effect. Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto's head snapped up, his heart pounding. Yes, this was it. Sakura Haruno. He leapt to his feet, cheering. Yahoo! True love wins. Sakura's head fell onto her desk with a loud thud. I'm doomed. And Sasuke Uchiha. The world flipped. Sakura shot up, her despair instantly replaced with triumphant glee. Cha, I win. True love prevails. Now it was Naruto's turn to slump, a storm cloud forming over his head. Of all the arrogant, stuck-up, gloomy jerks in the village, he had to be stuck with him. Iruka-sensei, he protested, pointing an accusing finger. Why does a top student like me have to be on the same team as this slug? Sasuke's grades were the best of all the graduates, Iruka said, a vein pulsing in his forehead. You, Naruto, were the dead last. We balance the teams to make them stronger. It's basic strategy. Naruto fumed in silence as the other teams were called and dismissed with their new Jonin instructors. Soon, only Team 7 remained, sitting in a classroom that felt vast and empty. The silence stretched, thick and awkward. Naruto fidgeted. Sakura tried to make eye contact with Sasuke, who was expertly studying the wood grain of his desk. An hour passed, then another. Suddenly, a hand appeared at the top of the doorframe, followed by a head of gravity-defying silver hair. My first impression of you all, a lazy voice drawled, is that you're a bunch of idiots. Their Jonin instructor had arrived. Kakashi Hatake, the legendary copy ninja, looked them over with his one visible eye. His expression utterly bored, he led them to a rooftop overlooking the village, the Hokage monument stark against the blue sky. All right, let's get this over with, he said, leaning against the railing. Introduce yourselves. Likes, dislikes, dreams for the future, that sort of thing. Why don't you go first, sensei? Sakura asked, her voice sweet. Kakashi sighed. My name is Kakashi Hatake. What I like and what I dislike, I don't feel like telling you that. My dreams for the future, haven't really thought about it. As for my hobbies, I have lots of hobbies. He had effectively told them nothing. You, on the right, the loud one, believe it, Naruto declared, puffing out his chest. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. I like instant ramen, but I like the meal Hinata's family gave me even more. I hate the 3 minutes you have to wait for the water to boil. My dream for the future is to become the greatest Hokage. Then the whole village will have to stop disrespecting me and treat me like I'm somebody important. Kakashi's eye crinkled slightly. Interesting growth, he thought. The boy had fire. All right, next. I'm Sakura Haruno, she chirped. What I like is, well, the person I like is, she glanced at Sasuke and giggled. My hobby is, another giggle. And my dream for the future is, she devolved into a high-pitched squeal. Girls her ag, are more interested in boys than ninjutsu, Kakashi mused, unimpressed. And the last one, my name is Sasuke Uchiha, he said, his voice low and cold. I hate a lot of things, and I don't particularly like anything. What I have is not a dream, because I will make it a reality. I'm going to restore my clan and destroy a certain someone. The air grew heavy. The cheerful mood evaporated, replaced By the chilling finality of Sasuke's vow. Naruto stared at him, a shiver running down his spine. Sakura looked worried. Just as I thought, Kakashi's inner voice was grim. He's an Avenger. Good. You. All unique and you all have your own ideas. We have our first mission tomorrow. A survival exercise. Naruto pumped his fist. Awesome. What kind of survival exercise? Kakashi's visible eye curved into a grin that was anything but reassuring. It's a special test. And you're the contestants. Out of the 27 graduates, only 9 will become genin. The other 18 will be sent back to the academy. This test has a 66% failure rate. The confidence drained from their faces, replaced by pure shock. So, Kakashi finished, pushing himself off the railing. Tomorrow at training ground 3. Be there at 5 a.m. And I'd advise you to skip breakfast, or you'll puke. He vanished in a swirl of leaves, leaving them to stare after him in stunned silence. The next morning, sun had barely kissed the horizon when Sakura and Sasuke arrived at the training ground. Naruto was nowhere in sight. Hours crawled by. The sun climbed higher, and their stomachs began to growl. Finally, well past 9 o'clock, Naruto came ambling down the path, waving cheerfully. You're late, Sakura shrieked, her voice echoing through the clearing. Sorry, a black cat crossed my path so I had to take the long way. Naruto said with a grin. Liar. Kakashi appeared in a puff of smoke, an alarm clock in his hand. All right, it's set for noon. He placed it on a stump and held up 2 small silver bells. Your task is simple. Come at me and take these bells before the timer runs out. Those who don't get a bell by noon get no lunch. You'll be tied to those posts and watch while I eat my lunch in front of you. Sakura's eyes widened. Wait a minute, sensei, there are 3 of us. Why are there only 2 bells? Kakashi's eye crinkled. Well, that way, at least one of you will end up on a post and will be disqualified for failing the mission. You'll go back to the academy. At least one of you. It could be all 3. He strapped the bells to his belt, their jingle a mocking little tune. Come at me with the intent to kill. Ready. Start. In an instant, Sakura and Sasuke leapt for cover, disappearing into the foliage. Naruto, however, stood his ground. He stared Kakashi down, his fists clenched. You and me, right here, right now, fair and square, he yelled. Kakashi sighed. You know, compared to the others, you're a little weird. Oh yeah, Naruto charged, roaring. Kakashi didn't even seem to move. His hand dipped into his hip pouch, but instead of a kunai, he pulled out a small, orange book. Make Out Paradise. He began reading it, completely ignoring Naruto's clumsy frontal assault. The morning was a masterclass in failure. Naruto's every direct attack was effortlessly countered. He fell for the most basic substitution jutsus and the most obvious traps. Sakura spent most of her time searching for Sasuke, only to be caught in a genjutsu that left her screaming and unconscious. Sasuke, for all his skill and arrogance, managed to put up a fight but was ultimately outclassed. Buried up to his neck by a simple earth-style jutsu. When the alarm clock rang at noon, the 3 of them stood defeated and demoralized before Kakashi. Naruto was tied to the middle post, his stomach rumbling like a caged beast. Sasuke and Sakura stood on either side of him, glaring at the ground. None of you got a bell, Kakashi said, his tone flat. So none of you get lunch. I have decided not to send any of you back to the academy. A flicker of hope. Naruto and Sakura looked up. I'm giving you one more chance after lunch, Kakashi announced. But it will be much harder. You will have to take the bells. Any of you who wishes to try may eat from these bentos. But, he added, his voice dropping to a dangerous level, do not give any food to Naruto. He tried to eat before the exercise was over. So he gets punished. If anyone feeds him, that person will be immediately disqualified. I am the law here. Got it. He placed 2 bento boxes on the ground and vanished again. The silence that followed was heavy with the tantalizing aroma of rice and fish. Sasuke and Sakura immediately grabbed the boxes and began to eat, pointedly ignoring the groans coming from Naruto's stomach. This is no time to be a burden. Naruto. Sakura scolded between mouthfuls. I need to be at my best to get a bell. Sasuke said nothing, shoveling rice into his mouth with cold efficiency. Naruto's head hung low. He had failed. He had let his team down. He was just the dead last, after all. He felt the familiar sting of isolation, the invisible wall between him and them thicker than ever. Then, a new sound. The quiet crinkle of a wrapper. Naruto looked up. It wasn't one of Kakashi's bento boxes. It was a third, larger box that Naruto himself had brought, now sitting open on the ground. Inside, arranged with surprising neatness, were several large, perfectly formed onigiri. "What's that?" Sakura asked, her mouth full. I made them this morning," Naruto mumbled, looking away in embarrassment. "I figured we'd be hungry. You know, the mission and all." He had woken up extra early, filled with a nervous energy. Remembering the strange, warm feeling he'd gotten from cooking for Hinata. He'd used the rest of the ingredients she'd gifted him. He had channeled all his hopes for his new team, his desperate desire to be accepted, into the simple act of pressing rice and fillings into triangles. It had felt right. "You made them," Sakura said, surprised. Sasuke just grunted, not even looking up. A shadow fell over them. Kakashi stood there, his arms crossed. Well, breaking the rules already. I suppose you're enjoying your meal while your teammate starves." But his eye wasn't on Sasuke or Sakura. It was fixed on the open box of onigiri. The aroma was simple. Rice, a hint of salt. The faint scent of pickled plum. But underneath it, to a shinobi of his caliber, there was something else. A faint, almost imperceptible warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. It was intent. Pure, concentrated intent. He had heard the rumors about the Hyuga girl, of course. He'd dismissed them as academy gossip. But now, "Looks like you made too much, Naruto," Kakashi said, his voice strangely mild. It'd be a shame to let it go to waste. He reached down and picked up one of the rice balls. Naruto's eyes went wide. "Sensei, you can't, you'll be disqualified." Kakashi just huckled and brought the onigiri to his mouth, pulling down his mask just enough to take a bite. The world did not explode. There was no flash of light. For Kakashi, it was far more profound. The taste of rice and salty plum hit his tongue. And the training ground, the trees, the genin tied to the post, all of it dissolved into a memory so vivid it was real. He was a boy again, standing in this very same clearing. Minato-sensei was smiling, his blonde hair bright in the sun. Obito was yelling, gesticulating wildly, while Rin laughed, her gentle presence a balm to their chaotic energy. He could feel the solid weight of Obito's hand clapping him on the shoulder, hear Rin's voice telling them to work together. He could feel the warmth of their bond, the unshakable certainty that they were a team, a family. For years, this memory had been a ghost, shrouded in the pain of loss and the suffocating weight of regret. It was a wound that had never healed. But now, the pain was gone. The memory was cleansed of its sorrow. It was just pure. It was the feeling of teamwork, of camaraderie, of belonging, distilled into its most potent form. It wasn't just a memory, it was the truth of what it meant to have comrades. Kakashi blinked, and the training ground snapped back into focus. He was holding the half-eaten onigiri, his hand trembling slightly. His single eye was wide, the lazy mask of indifference completely gone. He stared at Naruto, who was looking back at him with a mixture of confusion and fear. This was no mere food. This was something else entirely. Sakura watched the exchange, baffled. Kakashi-sensei, the cool, unflappable Jonin, looked shaken. Her own stomach growled, louder this time. The smell from Naruto's onigiri was simple, but it was incredibly enticing. Seeing no immediate lightning bolt of disqualification, and driven by a curiosity that overpowered her loyalty to Sasuke's silent treatment, she spoke. Can I have one?" she asked hesitantly. Naruto brightened instantly. Of course. She took the offered rice ball and bit into it. For Sakura, there was no memory. There was a feeling, a sudden, overwhelming surge of clarity. Her world, which for so long had been a tiny, cramped space revolving around Sasuke's approval, suddenly expanded to an infinite horizon. She felt the sharp, precise hum of her own mind, her talent for memory and analysis not as a tool for school, but as a formidable weapon. She felt the fine, delicate control she had over her own chakra, a river of potential she had only ever used to perform basic jutsu. A vision flashed behind her eyes, An older version of herself, her hands glowing with green chakra, her brow furrowed in concentration as she stood over a wounded shinobi. She saw herself standing not behind Sasuke, but beside him, an equal. She felt a wave of self-worth so powerful it was breathtaking. It was the undeniable truth that she, Sakura Haruno, was not just a fangirl. She was a kunoichi with the potential for greatness. She lowered the onigiri, her eyes wide with revelation. She looked at her own hands, then at Naruto, then at Sasuke. The dynamic had shifted. The ground beneath her feet felt more solid. Sasuke had watched it all. His eyes narrowed in suspicion. He saw Kakashi's shock. He saw the sudden, strange confidence that settled over Sakura. It was illogical. It was an anomaly that his analytical mind couldn't process. And he hated it. It was another one of Naruto's stupid tricks. Just eat your food, he snapped at Sakura. We have a test to pass. But Kakashi spoke, his voice regaining its authority, though it was now laced with a new, strange gravitas. 1 hour. The test resumes. This time, I expect you to have figured it out. He vanished once more. The air was different. Sakura was no longer trying to impress Sasuke, she was thinking. He said the mission was about teamwork, she said, her voice clear and analytical. He deliberately set us against each other with the bells. He tried to divide us with the food rule. The test isn't about whether we can get the bells. It's about whether we can act as a team. Sasuke grunted, still refusing to acknowledge the logic. We see. And do this if one of us is weak from hunger, Sakura continued, now looking directly at Naruto. She picked up her bento box. Here, Sakura-chan. Naruto was stunned. She's right, Sasuke said suddenly, shocking them both. He pushed his own bento box toward Naruto. We can't have you dragging us down. Eat. He refused to look at Naruto, his pride still a formidable wall. But the logic was undeniable. A weak link endangered the entire chain. Naruto felt a lump form in his throat. He looked at the offered food, then at his two teammates. For the first time, they weren't just three individuals who happened to be in the same place. They were a team. He broke into a huge grin. Thanks, guys, he said, and began to eat. When the test resumed, everything had changed. They attacked Kakashi not as three separate genin, but as a single, coordinated unit. Sakura, using her newfound clarity, became the strategist, observing Kakashi's movements and calling out openings. Naruto was the ultimate diversion. His shadow clones swarming their sensei from all sides. And Sasuke was the sharp edge of the spear, his Uchiha Taijutsu and Fireball Jutsu pressing the attack. They still weren't good enough. Kakashi was a Jonin, a former Anbu captain. He moved like water, flowing around their attacks, countering with an ease that was infuriating. They had him on the defensive, but they couldn't land the final blow. They were close, so close, but time was running out. They cornered him near the river. Naruto's clones held him in place. Sakura was ready to spring a wire trap, and Sasuke was in the air. A massive fireball building in his throat. But it was a feint. The real target was the bells. Naruto, the real Naruto, burst from the water beneath Kakashi, his hand outstretched. Kakashi simply sidestepped, letting Naruto's momentum carry him past. He dispatched the clones and tripped Sakura's wire. Sasuke's fireball hit nothing but water. They were spent. Time's almost up, Kakashi said, a hint of disappointment in his voice. In that moment of desperation, Naruto looked at the last, uneaten onigiri from his box, lying on the grass. An idea, born of instinct and a strange new understanding of his own power, sparked in his mind. Sasuke, he yelled, grabbing the rice ball and hurling it through the air. Catch. Sasuke, acting on pure reflex, snatched it from the air. He glared at it. What was he supposed to do with this? It was insane. But he saw the desperate, pleading look in Naruto's eyes. He saw Sakura nodding urgently. He was starving, his chakra depleted. With a snarl of frustration, he bit into it. The taste was of rice and tuna mayo. And love. He was in his home. It was the evening before the Uchiha clan massacre. His mother, Makoto, was placing a plate of food in front of him. Her smile the warmest thing in the universe. His father, Fugaku, sat at the head of the table, and as Sasuke looked at him, his father gave a rare, small nod of approval. Good work in training today. The words were simple, but they filled Sasuke's small chest with a pride so immense it felt like it could lift him off the ground. And then Itachi was there, poking him gently on the forehead. "Sorry, Sasuke. Maybe next time." There was no malice, no hidden meaning. There was just the easy, unshakable love of a family. The memory was a physical blow. It ripped through the wall of red he had so carefully constructed around his heart. It reminded him of what he was fighting for, not just the destruction of his brother, but the memory of the love he had lost. It was a reminder of the strength he once drew from those bonds. The vision faded. He was back in the training ground, the taste of tuna and tears in his mouth. He looked at Naruto and Sakura, not as rivals or annoyances, but as comrades. His team. In that split second of emotional clarity, he saw it. Kakashi, distracted by Naruto's bizarre throw, had shifted his weight. His hip, where the bells hung, was exposed for a fraction of a second. Sasuke moved. He didn't use a jutsu. He didn't need to. He flowed forward with a speed and grace born of pure instinct, his hands shooting out. Naruto and Sakura, sensing the shift, moved in perfect sync to cover him. Jingle. The sound was impossibly loud in the silent clearing. Sasuke stood there, the two silver bells clutched tightly in his hand. The alarm clock on the stump began to ring. Kakashi stared, his visible eye wide. Then, it crinkled into a genuine smile. "You pass." The relief was so immense it was dizzying. "The lesson of this exercise," Kakashi said, his voice warm for the first time, "is that in the shinobi world, those who break the rules are scum." "That's true. But those who abandon their friends are worse than scum." He looked at the three of them, truly a team now. "All of you passed." Quote, the story of how Team 7 passed their test, by sharing a meal, became the stuff of Academy legend by sunset. It was so weird, so utterly contrary to the competitive spirit of most shinobi, that no one knew what to make of it. Hiba Inuzuka knew what to make of it. He cornered Naruto in the street the next day, Akamaru barking at his feet. "I heard the ridiculous story, Naruto," he shouted, jabbing a finger in Naruto's chest. "You're telling everyone it was your cooking that made you pass. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You probably just poisoned Kakashi-sensei. My nose knows good food, and you smell like instant ramen and failure." Naruto bristled. "Oh yeah, my cooking is the best. Believe it. Prove it," Hiba challenged. "A cook-off. Tonight. Yakiniku Q. My steak against whatever slop you make. We'll let Choji's dad be the judge." The challenge drew a crowd. The Akamichi clan's barbecue restaurant was packed. Hiba was at the grill, theatrically searing a massive bone-in cut of wild boar, seasoned with a dozen pungent spices. The smell was overpowering, almost aggressive. Naruto stood at his own station, calm and focused. He had the sea bream Hinata had given him. He seasoned it simply, with a little salt and a touch of soy sauce. He heated a pan until it was shimmering, laid the fish skin side down, and pressed it with a spatula. The sound was a crisp, clean sizzle, and the aroma that rose was delicate, savory, and unbelievably appetizing. He served it over a small bed of perfectly steamed rice, garnished with a single sliver of scallion. Choza Akamichi, a man whose palate was legendary, tasted Kiba's steak first. He chewed thoughtfully. Bold, aggressive, lacks finesse, but it has passion. Then he took a bite of Naruto's fish. His eyes widened. He took another bite, slower this time. He closed his eyes, savoring it. He didn't say a word. He just pointed a large, authoritative finger at Naruto. The winner was clear. Hiba scoffed in disbelief. "No way. Let me try that." He snatched a piece of the fish and shoved it in his mouth. His world tilted. He was no longer in a restaurant. He was running through a forest, the wind in his fur. He was not Kiba. He was the alpha of a great wolf pack. He could feel the minds of his packmates linked to his own, their loyalty, their strength, their trust. He led them on a hunt, their movements a perfect, silent symphony of instinct and cooperation. It was a feeling of leadership and unity so profound it made his own bond with Akamaru feel like a pale imitation. He stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock. Akamaru, curious, hopped up and snagged a fallen crumb of the fish. The small dog froze, then trotted over to Naruto, sat down, and whined softly, nudging his HEA. D against Naruto's leg in a clear sign of deference. Kiba stared, utterly humbled. How? Naruto just shrugged, a confused but happy grin on his face. I just cooked it. Across the crowded room, a pair of sharp, intelligent turquoise eyes had watched the entire scene unfold. Ino Yamanaka had seen the change in her rival Sakura. She had heard the whispers about Hinata. And now she had just witnessed the proud, loud-mouthed Kiba Inuzuka be brought to his knees by a piece of fish. Her mind, trained in the arts of perception and sensing, was racing. This wasn't food. This was a phenomenon. As a power that communicated directly with a person's spirit, bypassing all defenses. It was a jutsu more subtle and more potent than anything in her clan's arsenal. And Naruto Uzumaki, the class clown, the dead last, was the one who wielded it. Her competitive spirit, her insatiable curiosity, and the shrewd mind of a Yamanaka all clicked into place. This was a power she had to understand. Later that night, Naruto was just about to settle in with a cup of tea when a sharp knock echoed on his door. He opened it to find Ino Yamanaka standing there, her arms crossed, her expression a mixture of fierce determination and unbridled curiosity. She looked past him into his small apartment, then met his gaze, her eyes narrowed. "All right, Naruto," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "Cut the act. You and I are going to have a little chat. I want to know your secret. And I'm not leaving until you tell me." Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. A Banquet of Steel and Lilies. Ino Yamanaka did not ask for permission to enter. The moment Naruto opened the door, she brushed past him, her turquoise eyes sweeping across the small, sparse apartment with an appraising glint. She took in the single table, the neatly made bed, the kitchenette that was barely more than a hot plate and a sink. It was the home of a forgotten child, yet it was from this barren soil that something utterly extraordinary had bloomed. Her gaze finally settled on Naruto, who stood by the open door, looking completely bewildered. "Close the door, Naruto," she said, her voice a smooth, confident command. "We wouldn't want your neighbors hearing this." He did as he was told, a confused frown creasing his brow. "Ino, what's going on? Did I do something wrong?" "That," she said, turning to face him fully, her arms crossed beneath her chest. "Is what I'm here to find out." She was every bit the clan heir, her posture exuding an authority far beyond her years. She was a censor, a mind walker by birthright, and she could feel the chaotic, powerful energy radiating from Naruto. It wasn't the furious, boiling chakra of the nine tails she had been taught to fear. It was something else, something warm, inviting, and deeply, fundamentally strange. "I don't understand," Naruto said, scratching the back of his head. "The cook-off. I won, but this isn't about a stupid barbecue contest," she cut him off, her eyes narrowing. "This is about what you did. I saw Kiba's face. I saw Akamaru. I've seen the way Sakura has been acting since your bell test. She's actually spending more time in the library than in front of a mirror. And I know for a fact that you did something to Hinata that completely changed her." She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "That's not cooking, Naruto. That's a jutsu, a powerful one. I've run through every possibility in my head. A high-level genjutsu triggered by taste. A chemical agent that alters brain function. A subtle application of chakra that influences the nervous system." She ticked them off on her fingers, her mind working like the trained intelligence operative she was born to be. "But none of it fits. There was no chakra flare, no chemical residue. So you're going to tell me what it is? Right now." Naruto stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. He had no answer. He had no grand secret, no hidden jutsu. The truth was so simple, so absurd, that he knew she would never believe it. I just cook," he said lamely. "I think about what the person needs, I guess. And then I make it." Ino's expression soured. "Don't play dumb with me. I'm a Yamanaka. We don't do dumb. My clan has spent centuries perfecting the art of entering a person's mind. What you're doing, you're touching their soul. And you're doing it with a piece of fish." He had no words. She was closer to the truth than he was. He just did it. She had given it a name. He felt a surge of frustration. Why did everything he do have to be so complicated? Why couldn't it just be a good thing? Look, I don't know what to tell you, he said, his voice rising. I don't have a secret jutsu. I just cook. Ino studied his face, her perceptive eyes searching for any hint of deception. She saw none. What she saw was a deep, frustrating well of genuine confusion. He really didn't know. The implications of that were almost more staggering than if it had been a secret technique. This power was innate, untrained, uncontrolled. Her approach softened. The interrogator receded, and the strategist emerged. Okay, she said, taking a breath. Okay, Naruto, if you can't tell me, then you'll have to show me. His eyes widened. Show you. You mean, cook for me, she confirmed, her gaze intense. Right now, I need to feel it for myself. I need to understand what this power is. A nervous energy fizzed through Naruto. He had cooked for Hinata out of a desperate empathy. He had made the onigiri for his team out of a hopeful desire for camaraderie. He had faced Kiba out of pride. But this was different. This was a test, a demand. He was being asked to perform, to put his strange, intuitive gift under the microscope of a Yamanaka's analytical mind. I don't have much, he stammered, gesturing to his sparse kitchen. Hinata's gift is all gone. Then we'll get more, Ino said, a determined glint in her eye. She grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Come on, my family owns a flower shop, but our business is information. We have access to markets you don't even know exist. She practically dragged him out of his apartment and through the darkening streets of Konoha. She led him not to the main market district, but to a quiet, unassuming side street. There, behind a simple wooden door marked with the elegant symbol of her clan, was another world. It wasn't a public market. It was a private, shinobi-run exchange. Jonin and clan heads moved through the space with quiet purpose, trading for rare herbs, specialized ninja tools, and scrolls of restricted jutsu. The air was thick with the scent of medicinal plants, weapon oil, and old parchment. Ino navigated the space with an owner's confidence, nodding to shinobi who would have ignored Naruto completely. She led him to a stall run by an old woman with eyes that seemed to see everything. The stall was filled with an array of strange and beautiful produce. There were mushrooms that glowed with a soft, internal light, peppers the color of midnight, and herbs whose leaves were veined with what looked like pure chakra. This is where the clans get their specialized ingredients, Ino explained in a low voice. Things that have absorbed natural energy. Most use them for medicines or poisons. I have a feeling you'll find a better use for them. Naruto's eyes were wide with wonder. He felt a strange pull from the ingredients, a faint hum that resonated with the power inside him. He pointed to a basket of small, delicate flowers, their petals a vibrant swirl of purple and gold. What are those? Chakra orchids, the old woman said, her voice like rustling leaves. They only bloom on mountain peaks during a thunderstorm. They absorb the lightning. Most medics use them to create powerful stimulants for the heart. Naruto reached out and gently touched a petal. He felt a tiny, pleasant jolt, a spark of contained energy. An idea began to form in his mind, a picture of a dish, a harmony of flavors and feelings. He picked out the orchids, a handful of luminous, glimmer shrooms, and a strange, sweet-smelling root called serenity root. Ino paid with a flash of Ryo from her pouch without even asking the price. This was an investment. Back in his apartment, the atmosphere had changed. It was no longer an interrogation, it was a laboratory. Ino sat at his table, watching with the intense focus of a hawk. Naruto laid out the new ingredients, his nervousness replaced by a deep, instinctual concentration. The clumsy genin was gone again, replaced by the focused artist. He decided not to make a full meal. This was an experiment, a single, focused taste. He rinsed a handful of high-quality rice, a small bag he'd bought with the last of his money, and set it to steam. While it cooked, he began to prepare the other elements. He shaved the serenity root into paper-thin slices and steeped them in hot water, creating a clear, fragrant tea. He gently sautéed the glimmer shrooms in a single drop of oil, their faint light intensifying with the heat until they glowed like embers. Finally, he took the chakra orchids. He didn't cook them. He simply plucked the petals, the vibrant colors almost electric under his lamp. When the rice was done, he took a small portion and, with practiced hands, pressed it into a delicate, bite-sized morsel. He placed a single, glowing mushroom in the center. Then topped it with one perfect, shimmering petal from a chakra orchid. He placed the single, exquisite piece on a small plate and set it in front of Ino. Next to it, he placed a small cup of the steaming serenity root tea. That's it, she asked, her eyebrow raised. That's it, he confirmed, his voice quiet. Ino looked at the offering. It was beautiful, a piece of edible art. The mushroom pulsed with a soft, golden light, and the orchid petals seemed to hum with contained energy. It was a dish that was both elegant and powerful, a reflection of her own self-image. She took a deep breath, steeling her mind, building the psychic walls that were her birthright. She would observe this experience, analyze it, and she would not be overwhelmed. She picked up the piece and placed it in her mouth. The first sensation was a burst of flavor unlike anything she had ever experienced. The rice was sweet and nutty, the mushroom had a deep, earthy taste that was both comforting and complex. And the orchid petal was like a tiny, contained lightning strike. A harmless but exhilarating jolt of pure energy that made every nerve in her body sing. And then her mental walls shattered like glass. She was no longer in Naruto's apartment. She was standing in the center of a vast, intricate web of light. Each strand was a connection, a relationship, a secret, a loyalty within Konoha. She saw the bright, bold lines connecting the clans, the shadowy threads that led to Danzo's root, the golden, powerful cord that was the Hokage's will. She saw everything. As the Yamanaka clan's ultimate purpose, to understand the heart and mind of the village, made manifest before her. But she wasn't just an observer. She was the weaver. Her hands, trailing threads of her own pale, lilac-colored light, could touch the strands. She could see how a gentle tug on one thread, an alliance with the Akamichi, would cause a vibration in another, the village's food supply and economic stability. She saw how severing a dark, rotten thread could heal a dozen others. She saw the entire, complex, beautiful, and dangerous political landscape of her world with a god-like clarity. And at the very center of the web, not trapped but anchored, was a blazing sun of pure, chaotic, and unbelievably potent energy. It was Naruto. He wasn't a piece to be moved on the board. He was a new source of gravity. His influence pulling on every strand around him, creating new connections, strengthening old ones, and threatening to burn away the rot. The vision was not a memory of the past or a comfort for the present. It was a glimpse of the future. It was a roadmap to power, to influence, to a way of protecting her village and her friends that went beyond espionage and interrogation. It was the ultimate expression of her own ambition and her own hidden desire to make a difference. This power of his wasn't just a tool for comfort, it was a key. A key that could unlock the full potential of everyone it touched. And it was a weapon that could reshape the world. The vision receded, leaving her breathless, her heart pounding in her chest. The exhilarating taste of the orchid still lingered on her tongue. She looked at Naruto, and for the first time, she wasn't looking at the class clown or an anomaly to be studied. She was looking at the future. Her future. My God, Naruto, she breathed. Her voice filled with a reverence that startled them both. You don't just make people feel better. You show them what they can become. He just blushed, unsure how to respond to the intensity in her gaze. Ino's mind was already working, the vision having kickstarted her strategic brain into overdrive. This apartment is unacceptable, she declared, standing up and pacing the small room. This equipment, she gestured to his sad little hot plate, is an insult to your gift. You need a proper kitchen. You need a steady supply of the best ingredients. You need a place to work where you won't be disturbed. But Ino, I can't afford any of that, Naruto said, overwhelmed by her sudden take-charge attitude. You won't be paying for it, she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. My family has a small property near the market district, a little restaurant that's been closed for years. I'll have it opened. We'll get it cleaned, stocked. It will be yours. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a decree. Why? He asked, genuinely confused by her sudden, fierce patronage. Why would you do all that? She stopped pacing and turned to him, a brilliant, ambitious smile on her face. Because, Naruto, a flower this rare can't be left to grow in a dark alley. It needs a proper garden. And she said, her voice dropping with purpose, I'm going to be your gardener. True to her word, Ino was a force of nature. Within 2 days, Naruto was standing in front of a small but professional-grade kitchen. It was sparkling clean, stocked with new pots, sharp knives, and a pantry that Ino had personally filled with both high-quality staples and a selection of rare ingredients from the clan market. Hinata, hearing the news, had quietly contributed a supply of the Hyuga clan's own specially cultivated vegetables. Renowned for their purity, it was more than Naruto could have ever dreamed of. He had a base, a sanctuary. He spent every spare moment there, experimenting, learning, letting his intuition guide him. He discovered that the intent he put into the food was the most crucial ingredient. A dish cooked with happiness could lift a person's spirits. A meal prepared with focus could sharpen their mind. His circle of allies, his first real friends, began to gather there. It became their unofficial headquarters after missions. Hinata would sit quietly, her presence a calming balm. Ino would be there, managing the logistics, her mind always working, seeing the bigger picture. Even Sakura started showing up, drawn by an intellectual curiosity about Naruto's ability that now outweighed her desire to chase Sasuke. It was during one of these evenings that Tenten arrived. She had been brought by Ino, who had noticed the weapons expert's growing frustration. Tenten entered the small restaurant space cautiously, her twin hair buns bouncing with the movement. She was pragmatic, down to earth, and deeply skeptical. "So this is the place," she said, looking around. "Ino said you were a good cook. I hope that's true. After a day of watching Lee try to punch a waterfall into submission, I could use a decent meal." Naruto smiled. He had seen Team Guy training earlier that day. He'd seen the dynamic up close. Guy, Neji, and Lee were a whirlwind of taijutsu, a hurricane of youthful energy and esoteric training maxims. And Tenten was the eye of the storm. She was the anchor, the support, the one who supplied the kunai for their target practice, the one who patched up their injuries, the one whose own formidable skills were treated as a reliable, but secondary, part of the team's arsenal. He had sensed the deep, simmering frustration behind her capable exterior, the desire to be seen not as a tool, but as a master of her own craft. "I'll make you something," he said simply, and disappeared into the kitchen. He didn't make one single dish. Instead, he prepared a series of small, perfect plates. It was a meal of precision. He laid out a plate of razor-thin slices of seared tuna, each slice exactly identical. He followed it with a skewer of grilled vegetables, each piece cut into a perfect, sharp diamond. He created a small, intricate salad where every leaf was placed with artistic deliberation. The main course was a complex dish, a perfectly sealed parcel of paper-thin dough, baked to a golden crisp. When Tenten cut it open with a fork, it released a puff of fragrant steam, revealing a meticulously arranged filling of minced fowl, sharp herbs, and crunchy water chestnuts. Each dish was a testament to control, balance, and the beauty of sharp, clean execution. It was a meal that mirrored the soul of a weapons master. Tenten ate in silence, her initial skepticism melting away with each bite. The flavors were incredible, sharp, clean, and distinct. There was no confusing mush of ingredients. Each element was its own perfect note in a larger symphony. It was the most satisfying meal she had ever had. And then, as she took a bite of the final, crisp parcel, the vision came. She was standing in a forge, the air hot with the breath of the fire. But this was no ordinary forge. It was a place of creation, a conceptual space where the very idea of a weapon was born. Racks and walls were filled with not just kunai and swords, but with their platonic ideals. She saw the perfect sharpness of a blade, the perfect balance of a thrown senbon, the unstoppable arc of a fuma shuriken. A figure of pure, white-hot light stood at an anvil, hammering a piece of glowing metal. It was a divine blacksmith. She felt no fear, only a deep sense of homecoming. The blacksmith turned, and she saw that it had no face, only a brilliant light. It held out the hammer to her. "A weapon is not dead metal," a voice echoed, not in her ears but in her very bones. "It is a vessel for will. Its spirit is an extension of your own. Understand its heart, and it will become a part of you." She took the hammer. It felt impossibly heavy and perfectly light at the same time. She looked down at the metal on the anvil and knew, with an unshakable certainty, exactly where to strike. She brought the hammer down. Clang. The sound brought her back to the small restaurant. The last bite of food was still in her mouth. Her hands were resting on the table, but she could still feel the phantom weight of the divine hammer. She looked down at her own palms, a sense of wonder dawning on her face. She had always been skilled. She had perfect aim, a deep knowledge of her arsenal. But she had always treated her weapons as tools. Superior tools, but tools nonetheless. Now she understood. They weren't just objects to be thrown or swung. They had a balance, a spirit, a will that she could connect with. She looked up at Naruto, who was watching her with a knowing, gentle expression. I have to go, she said. Her voice filled with a new, urgent energy. She stood up, her movements sharp and decisive. Thank you, Naruto. Thank you. She gave a short, respectful bow and then she was gone. Sprinting toward her personal training ground, her mind alight with 1,000 new possibilities, new ways to combine her scrolls, new trajectories for her blades, a whole new level of mastery awaiting her. Ino smirked, taking a sip of her tea. Well, she said with satisfaction. That's another one. Deep beneath the village, in a cold, stone chamber devoid of light and warmth, Danzo Shimura reviewed the day's reports. His one exposed eye scanned the neat calligraphy of his root operatives. The reports had become increasingly focused on one subject, Naruto Uzumaki. He read about the acquisition of the new kitchen, funded by the Yamanaka clan. He read about the regular gatherings, a list of attendees that now included the Hyuga heir, the Yamanaka heir, the Haruno girl who was the I's student of the Hokage's own apprentice, and now, a promising weapons specialist. Danzo was not a man given to emotional outbursts, but a cold, heavy anger settled in his gut. This was not a group of friends sharing meals. This was the formation of a faction, a private power base, centered around the Jinchuriki. And it was a power he could not understand or control. He had seen the detailed analysis of the food. No poison, no genjutsu-inducing agents, no discernible chakra infusions. It was, by all scientific measures, just exceptionally well-made food. But the results were undeniable. Hinata's newfound confidence had made her a contender for the clan leadership again, upsetting the delicate internal balance of the Hyuga. Sakura's academic performance had skyrocketed. Tenten had, according to the latest training ground reports, developed a new barrage technique that was considered Jonin level in its complexity and lethality. This was a threat, a subtle, insidious threat to the very foundation of his Konoha. His village was built on strength that could be measured, on jutsu that could be learned and catalogued, on bloodlines that could be controlled, on soldiers who followed orders without question. Naruto's power was the opposite of all that. It was intuitive, emotional, and worst of all, it inspired a fierce, personal loyalty that superseded any duty to the village chain of command. It created free thinking, empowered individuals, and free thinkers were dangerous. He is winning their hearts, Danzo murmured to the shadows. He had always believed that the heart was a liability for a shinobi. A weakness to be exploited or excised. Naruto was weaponizing it. He could not send assassins. Not yet. The boy was the Nine Tails vessel, and more importantly, he was now public. Surrounded by the heirs of two powerful and respected clans. An attack would be messy, political suicide. No, he had to use a more elegant weapon. He had to use the system itself. He stood and walked toward the exit of his chamber. Summon the elders, he commanded to the empty air. A masked root shinobi shimmered into existence from the shadows and bowed. I wish to have a word with Homura and Kaharu. And then, we will be paying a visit to the Hokage. The summons came at midday. Naruto was in his kitchen, showing Hinata how to properly fillet a fish, his movements patient and precise. Ino was at a table, going over merchant ledgers, finding the best prices for quality ingredients. The bell above the door chimed, and they all looked up. It was not a customer. It was an Anbu, his Porce. Lane cat mask utterly devoid of expression. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. Naruto Uzumaki. The ANBU's voice was flat, electronically filtered through the mask. You are to come with me. The Hokage and the Council of Elders have summoned you for a formal inquiry. Naruto's hands froze, the knife held steady over the fish. An inquiry? What had he done? He looked at Ino, whose face had gone pale. Her usual confident smirk completely gone. She understood the political language. A formal inquiry. with the full council was not a friendly chat. It was an accusation. What is the nature of this inquiry? Ino asked, her voice sharp as she stepped between Naruto and the Anbu operative. That is for the council to discuss, the Anbu replied, his head tilting slightly. My orders are to bring him. Now. Naruto wiped his hands on a cloth, his heart beginning to beat a heavy, nervous rhythm against his ribs. He felt the familiar chill of being singled out, of being judged by the village's powerful and unseen forces. But as he looked at Ino standing protectively in front of him, and Hinata who had moved to stand at his side, her hand hovering near a pouch of senbon, he felt a new sensation as well, the steadying warmth of having allies. He was not alone this time. He put a reassuring hand on Ino's shoulder. It's okay, he said, his voice calmer than he felt. I'll go. He straightened his jacket and walked toward the Anbu, his head held high. He was Naruto Uzumaki, genin of Team 7, friend to the Hyuga and Yamanaka. He was a chef. He had done nothing wrong. He had only helped people. He would face them, and he would tell them the truth. As the Anbu led him out of the restaurant and into the bright sunlight, he didn't see the shadowy figure watching from a nearby rooftop, a single bandaged eye seeing a crucial piece of a long and complicated plan finally click into place. The game had begun. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Flavor of a Bitter Truth. The walk to the Hokage Tower was the longest of Naruto's life. The Anbu operative moved with an unnatural silence, a ghost in a cat mask leading him through the bustling village streets. The usual sounds, the chatter of merchants, the laughter of children, seemed to warp and fade as he passed. The curious glances from the villagers felt different today. They weren't looks of scorn or pity, they were looks of suspicion. Their whispers like the rustle of dry leaves behind him. He felt the invisible wall between him and the world rematerializing, thicker and colder than ever. He was not taken to the Hokage's familiar, sunlit office. Instead, the Anbu led him deep into the tower, to a chamber he had never seen before. The door was heavy, carved from a dark, ancient wood. When it opened, it revealed a room that seemed to swallow the light. A long, polished table dominated the space, its surface reflecting the grim faces of those seated around it. The walls were lined with portraits of the previous Hokage, their painted eyes a silent, judging audience. The air was heavy with the scent of old paper and the immense weight of history. At the head of the table sat Hiruzen Sarutobi, the third Hokage. He looked older and more weary than Naruto had ever seen him, the lines on his face carved deep with concern. To his right sat his old teammates, the village elders. Kaharu Udatane, her face a mask of stern disapproval, and Homura Mitokado, his arms crossed, his expression one of deep skepticism. But it was the man standing in the shadows behind them who made the hair on Naruto's arms stand up. Danzo Shimura. His right eye was covered by bandages, his face was a network of ancient scars, and he held a cane in one hand, though he seemed to need no support. He radiated a coldness that was not of the body, but of the soul. He was the darkness that Naruto had always sensed lurking at the edges of the village, now brought into the light. Naruto Uzumaki, Hiruzen began, his voice echoing slightly in the chamber. Thank you for coming. We have matters of great importance to discuss. Am I in trouble, old man? Naruto asked, trying to keep his voice steady. He hated how small it sounded in this cavernous room. That is what we are here to determine, Kaharu interjected, her voice sharp as broken glass. It has been brought to our attention that you have been employing an unregistered jutsu. A technique of influence that you have used on several of your peers, including the heirs to the Hyuga and Yamanaka clans. It's not a jutsu, Naruto protested, his fists clenching. It's just cooking. A likely story, Homura grunted. We have reports detailing profound and immediate changes in the personality, confidence, and even the technical skills of those who consume your cooking. That is not the effect of a simple meal. That is the work of a mind-altering technique. Naruto's head spun. They were twisting it, making his attempts to help sound sinister and manipulative. He looked to the Hokage for help. But Hiruzen's gaze was troubled, his fingers steepled before his lips. He was trapped, a politician caught between his affection for Naruto and the immense pressure of his council. It was Danzo who spoke next, his voice a low, chilling rasp that seemed to drain the warmth from the air. The Jinchuriki has developed a dangerous and unpredictable ability. It fosters a powerful emotional dependency, bypassing traditional loyalty to the chain of command. It has created a faction loyal not to Konoha, but to himself. In a time of precarious peace, such an uncontrolled variable poses a significant threat to the security of this village. It must be classified, controlled, or neutralized. Neutralized. The word hung in the air like a poisoned dart. Naruto felt a flash of pure, hot anger. They wanted to take this one good thing, this one piece of himself that wasn't the demon fox, this one way he could finally connect with people, and they wanted to chain it up or kill it. "You're wrong," Naruto said, his voice low but ringing with a conviction that surprised even himself. "I haven't hurt anyone. I've helped them. Ask them. Ask Hinata or Sakura or Tenten. Their testimony would be compromised," Danzo stated coolly. "They are already under your influence." Naruto was trapped in a cage of their logic. Anything he said was dismissed, any proof he offered was tainted. It was his word against theirs, and in this room, his word meant nothing. "There is one way to settle this," Hiruzen finally said, his authority cutting through the tension. "A demonstration. You will prepare a meal, here. Under our observation. We have selected 3 individuals to partake. Their reactions will be evaluated." It was a test, a trial by fire, and Naruto knew he had no choice but to accept. A temporary kitchen station was brought into an adjoining observation chamber. It was sterile, all metal and sharp angles, a stark contrast to the warm, welcoming kitchen Ino had provided. 3 shinobi were brought in to act as the tasters. They sat at a plain wooden table, their expressions ranging from stern to emotionless. Naruto recognized the first immediately, Hodo Hyuga, one of the main family's most conservative and formidable elders. He was a man who embodied the rigid discipline of his clan, his face a stony mask, his empty white eyes seeming to judge Naruto's very soul. The second was Shikaku Nara, the current head of the Nara clan and the village's Jonin commander. He slouched in his chair, a bored, tired expression on his face, but Naruto could see razor-sharp intellect working behind his eyes. The third man was a stranger. He was lean, with pale skin and dead, emotionless eyes. He wore the standard Jonin flak jacket, but there was a stillness about him, a complete lack of presence. That screamed Anbu. More than that, it screamed root. Naruto could feel Danzo's will emanating from the man like a chill. This was his panel. A man of rigid tradition, a man of pure logic. And a man with no soul. How could he possibly cook for them? What could he even make? He took a deep breath, closing his eyes and forcing the intimidating faces from his mind. He couldn't think of them as judges. He had to think of them as people. What was the truth of them? The council had accused him of manipulation, of hiding the truth. Fine, he would give them the truth. He would make a dish so pure, so honest, that it could do nothing but reveal the truth of the person who ate it. He decided on the simplest, most fundamental dish he could think of, a clear soup. Suimono. It was a dish with nothing to hide behind. Its quality was based entirely on the purity of its dashi, the foundational broth, and the quality of its few, simple ingredients. It was a liquid mirror. He began to work, his earlier nervousness melting away as the familiar motions took over. He filled a pot with clean, cold water. He took a piece of kombu, a type of dried kelp, and gently wiped it clean, adding it to the pot. He heated it slowly, carefully, his entire focus on the pot, drawing out the kelp's deep, savory essence. Just before it boiled, he removed the kombu and added a handful of katsuobushi, shaved, smoked bonito flakes. The moment they hit the water, a rich, intoxicating aroma filled the sterile room. He let them steep for less than a minute before straining the broth through a fine cloth. The result was a dashi of breathtaking clarity and color, a pale, shimmering gold. It was the soul of the ocean, the essence of umami. To this perfect base, he would add only 3 things. A single, paper-thin slice of steamed white fish, a tiny, intricately carved flower made from a sliver of carrot, and 1 perfect, verdant leaf of mitsuba parsley. Each element was chosen for its purity, its honesty. He poured the golden broth into 3 simple lacquer bowls, placed the garnishes with the precision of a surgeon, and covered them with lids. He carried the tray to the table and set a bowl before each of the 3 shinobi. "What is this?" Elder Hodo asked, his voice a low rumble of disapproval. "This is peasant's fare. Watery soup. It's a dish to reveal the truth, Naruto said simply. Shikaku Nara sighed, the picture of a man being put through a troublesome ordeal. Well, let's get this over with. The three men removed their lids. A gentle puff of steam rose, carrying the clean, savory scent of the sea. They picked up their spoons and took the first taste. For a moment, there was silence. Then, Elder Hoato's spoon clattered against the table. His ramrod straight posture sagged. His stony face, which had likely not shown emotion in decades, crumpled. A single, crystalline tear traced a path down his weathered cheek, a shocking sight against his featureless white eye. He whispered a name, a woman's name, so softly it was barely audible. Miyako. The soup had not given him a grand vision. It had given him one, perfect, devastatingly clear memory. He was a young man, not yet a clan elder, sitting in a small garden with his wife. The sun was warm on their faces. She was laughing, a sound he had long since forgotten, as she handed him a bowl of soup, this very soup. It was a memory of a time before duty had calcified his heart, a time when he had known a gentleness and love that he had long ago buried under the immense weight of Hyuga tradition. The flavor was the taste of his own lost heart, a bitter and beautiful truth. Shikaku Nara did not weep. His reaction was quieter but no less profound. His eyes, usually half closed with boredom, were wide open, staring into the depths of the bowl as if it held the secrets of the universe. His breath hitched. He wasn't seeing a memory. He was seeing a shogi board. A vast, impossibly complex G-aim board that represented the future of Konoha. He saw the pieces, the clans, the other villages, the Akatsuki, Danzo. He saw the branching paths of causality, the infinite possibilities. And now, a new piece had been placed on the board. It was a golden sun, Naruto's piece, and its presence changed everything. It wasn't a pawn or a knight, it was a piece that changed the very rules of the game. He saw paths to victory, to peace. That had been impossible moments before. He saw how Naruto's influence could forge alliances, heal old wounds, and inspire a new generation of shinobi. He also saw the immense danger. The paths where that light was extinguished, plunging the board into an even deeper darkness. It was the most complex, terrifying, and exhilarating strategic problem he had ever faced. What a drag, he whispered. But for the first time in his life, it sounded like a prayer. The third man, Danzo's operative, had the most violent reaction. He took one sip and his whole body went rigid. His eyes, once empty, were now wide with a primal terror. A low, guttural moan escaped his lips. The conditioning, the years of mental and emotional suppression that made him a perfect root shinobi, shattered like a mirror struck by a hammer. He wasn't seeing a memory or a future. He was seeing himself. He was seeing the terrified child he had been, stolen from his family. He was feeling all the pain, fear, and doubt that had been systematically crushed and buried deep within his psyche. The soup had simply held up a mirror to his soul, and the reflection was a monster of suppressed humanity. A silent scream that had been held back for years. He began to tremble violently, sweat beading on his forehead, his perfect shinobi composure utterly destroyed by the simple taste of a clear broth. In the observation room, the council was silent, stunned. They had witnessed three of the most controlled minds in Konoha, a traditionalist, a genius, and a conditioned doll, be completely and utterly undone by a bowl of soup. Danzo's one visible eye was narrowed to a slit, his hand gripping his cane so tightly his knuckles were white. He had expected a subtle influence, a pleasant feeling. He had not expected this. This was not a tool of influence. It was a weapon that could bypass every defense, every wall a shinobi built around their mind, and strike directly at their core. It could break his root soldiers. It could inspire armies. He had been right to be afraid. He had not been afraid enough. Hiruzen looked from the broken men at the table to the young boy who stood there, looking nervous and hopeful. He had proven his point. The power was not a malicious jutsu. It was something else, something profound. But Danzo was also right. It was dangerous. It was a power that could change the world. And Hiruzen's world was balanced on a knife's edge. He was the Hokage. His duty was to protect the village, to maintain the balance. And this boy was a walking earthquake. With a heavy heart, he made his decision. The verdict was a compromise born of fear and politics. Naruto was cleared of any malicious intent. But his ability was now officially classified as a unique, UNR. Ankh-Kekkei Genkei of the highest possible security risk. Naruto Uzumaki, Hiruzen announced, his voice heavy, from this day forward, you are forbidden from using this ability on any active Konohagakure shinobi without their express written consent. This consent must be co-signed by their direct commanding officer and filed with the Hokage's office. Any violation of this directive will be considered a high-level offense against the village. Is that understood? Naruto stared at him, the words hitting him like a physical blow. Forbidden. He was being punished for helping. They had wrapped his gift in so much red tape it was effectively useless. He couldn't just offer a comforting meal to a friend after a hard mission. He would have to file paperwork. It was a mockery. But that's not fair. He protested. It is the council's decision, Hiruzen said, his voice leaving no room for argument. The unspoken words hung in the air. It is this, or it is what Danzo wanted. Deep in a dimensi, on of bleached white stone and dying stars, a figure sat on a throne carved from a single, massive bone. Its skin was a chalky, dead white, and two short, jagged horns grew from its forehead. This was Momoshiki Otsutsuki, a being who traveled the void between worlds, consuming the life and energy of planets to distill it into the fruit that granted him power and prolonged his life. For eons, the flavors had been the same. The raw, violent energy of a Jinchuriki. The subtle, aged power of a world's ley lines. The fleeting, bitter taste of a dying civilization's fear. They were all base, primitive flavors, sustenance but not art. But just now, for the briefest of moments, something new had wafted across the cosmic winds. It was faint, almost imperceptible, a scent so complex and exquisite it made the dying starlight he was currently consuming taste like ash in his mouth. It wasn't the raw power of a tailed beast. It was something refined. It was the flavor of emotion, of potential, of a truth so pure it was a delicacy. It was a nascent spice, a whisper of a flavor he had never before encountered in all his millennia of consumption. He lifted his head, his Rinnegan eyes scanning the infinite void. He couldn't pinpoint the source. Not yet. It was too faint, too new. But he had tasted it. And the Otsutsuki were connoisseurs of power. Whatever it was, wherever it was, he would find it. And he would devour it. Naruto walked out of the Hokage Tower, the formal decree clutched in his hand, a piece of paper that felt as heavy as a gravestone. The sun seemed too bright, the cheerful sounds of the village an insult. He had won, but it felt exactly like losing. As he reached the bottom of the steps, he saw them waiting for him. Ino, Hinata, and Tenten. They stood together, their faces a mixture of anxiety and defiance. What happened? Ino demanded, her eyes scanning his face for answers. He just handed her the scroll. She read it quickly, her eyes flying across the formal script. Tenten and Hinata read over her shoulder. Tenten let out a low whistle. Are you kidding me? Consent forms. From a commanding officer, she said, her voice dripping with scorn. That's insane. Why have basically forbidden you from helping your comrades. It is a great injustice, Hinata said, her voice low but firm, her usual timidity replaced by cold anger. Naruto just slumped onto the bottom step, his head in his hands. What am I supposed to do? It's over. They've locked it away. Ino finished reading the decree for a second time, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. It was the smile of a Yamanaka who had just found a critical flaw in her opponent's defenses. No, they haven't, she said, tapping the scroll with a perfectly manicured finger. They've just given us the rules. And every shinobi knows that the rules are just a framework to be exploited. Naruto looked up, confused. What are you talking about? Read it carefully, Ino said, her eyes glinting with strategic brilliance. It says you are forbidden from using your ability on any active Konoha shinobi. She leaned in, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. It says nothing about what ingredients we, as your teammates, choose to bring you. And it says nothing about you preparing those ingredients for us to evaluate their properties as part of our team's culinary development. A spark of understanding lit in Tenten's eyes. It's a loophole. It's a loophole the size of the Hokage monument, Ino confirmed with a triumphant grin. They've restricted you from acting on shinobi. They haven't tricked us from acting as your suppliers. We will be the ones to gather what you need. We will be the ones who request your services for our own training. They can't stop us from being your friends. Naruto looked at them, at Tenten, with her newfound, sharp-edged confidence, at Hinata, with her quiet, unshakable strength, and at Ino, with her brilliant, defiant mind. They weren't just standing up for him. They were standing with him. They were defying the council, the elders, the entire system, for him. They were not a faction. They were a clan, his clan. He stood up, the dejection and despair washing away, replaced by a surge of warmth and gratitude so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. He looked at the three powerful kunoichi who had chosen to stand by his side. Okay, he said, a slow, determined grin spreading across his face. Where do we start? Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Harvest of Waves. The mission scroll felt crisp and new in Kakashi's hand. C rank. Escort duty. A simple milk run to the land of waves, protecting a bridge builder named Tizuna. On paper, it was the perfect first mission for a newly minted genin team, a straightforward assignment designed to build experience without any real danger. But as Kakashi watched his three charges bicker over who got to carry the main pack, he knew that nothing with this particular team was ever going to be simple. I should carry it. My chakra control is the most precise, so I can distribute the weight evenly. Sakura argued, pointing to her forehead protector as if it were a diploma in logistics. You're just trying to get out of guard duty. Billboard brow. Sasuke grunted, not even gracing her with a look. No way, I'm the leader, so I should carry the supplies. Believe it, Naruto declared, puffing out his chest. Kakashi sighed, a familiar sense of exasperation washing over him. And yet, underneath the surface-level squabbling, something was different. The arguments were lighter now, the insults lacking their former venom. Since the bell test, the jagged, hostile edges of their individual personalities had been worn slightly smoother. They operated less like three strangers forced into a room and more like a dysfunctional, but genuine, family. The catalyst for this change was currently packing the supplies Naruto was trying to claim. Instead of the standard issue, tasteless soldier pills, Naruto was carefully wrapping a series of dense, nutrient-packed bars made of oats, nuts, and a strange, sweet paste he'd made from dried fruit. He was also packing several portions of expertly sliced and dried meat, a form of jerky that smelled faintly of ginger and star anise. Kakashi had sampled one of the bars earlier, under the guise of a routine safety inspection. The taste was phenomenal, but the effect was more so. It didn't just fill the stomach, it settled the mind, creating a state of calm, sustained focus that was the ideal state for any shinobi on the road. The boy was a walking, talking force multiplier. All right, that's enough, Kakashi drawled, appearing between them with a lazy swirl of leaves. We'll rotate the pack. Naruto, you're up first. Let's go meet our client. Their client, Tizuna, was a grizzled old man who smelled faintly of sake and sawdust. He took one look at the three genin, especially the short, loud, orange-clad one, and his face soured. This is the best Konoha has to offer. He scoffed. I asked for an escort, not a field trip for a bunch of snot-nosed brats. Don't worry, old man. Naruto shot back, jabbing a thumb at his own chest. I'm a super elite ninja who's going to be Hokage someday. And these two are, also here. You're in safe hands. Tizuna just grumbled, took a long pull from a hidden flask, and set off down the road, leaving them to hurry after him. The journey out of the land of fire was uneventful, the path shaded by tall, ancient trees. As the sun reached its zenith, Kakashi called for a break. Time to refuel, he announced. Naruto eagerly handed out the food bars. Sakura and Sasuke accepted them without complaint, a testament to how much things had changed. As they ate, Kakashi observed them. There was a subtle shift in their awareness. Their eyes seemed sharper, their senses more attuned to the sounds of the forest around them. It was a marginal improvement, but in their line of work, margins were the difference between life and death. His sharpened senses, and theirs, were why they all noticed the puddle. It was a clear, sunny day, and it hadn't rained in at least a week. A puddle had no business being in the middle of their path. Kakashi kept walking, his posture relaxed, but his mind was racing. He gave a subtle hand signal that his team, to his surprise, caught and understood. Danger. Proceed as normal. Two figures erupted from the water. Their movements impossibly fast. Chains tipped with wicked claws shot out, wrapping around Kakashi. With a vicious tug, the chains pulled taut, and their sensei was ripped into bloody, shredded pieces. Sakura screamed. Naruto froze, his eyes wide with horror. Sasuke's hand flew to his kunai pouch, his face a mask of grim determination. One down, a voice hissed. The two attackers, shinobi from the village hidden in the mist wearing metal-clawed gauntlets, turned their attention to the genin. Now to take care of the brats and the bridge builder. They charged, but the fear that should have paralyzed Naruto was different this time. It was a cold, sharp shock, but the food in his system, the feeling of calm focus it provided, acted as an anchor. He saw Sasuke move, kunai flashing, and his body reacted in concert. He threw himself in front of Tazuna, a kunai of his own held in a shaky but determined grip. Before the mist nin could reach them, however, a shadow dropped from the trees. "Don't you think you're forgetting someone?" Kakashi's lazy voice drawled from behind them. With two swift, precise chops to the back of their necks, he dispatched both attackers. Naruto and Sakura stared, their mouths agape, at the bloody logs that lay where Kakashi had been killed. A substitution jutsu. "Sorry I didn't help you right away," Kakashi said, a hint of apology in his voice. "I needed to see who their target was." He looked down at the unconscious ninjas, then at the trembling bridge builder. "Tazuna-san. These are chunin from Kurigakure. Hunter Nin. AC rank mission doesn't involve encounters with foreign shinobi. You have some explaining to do." Tazuna, trapped, confessed everything. The Land of Waves was a poor, independent nation, its eco. Nomi and its people held in a chokehold by a shipping magnate named Gato, a cruel man who used hired thugs and rogue ninja to enforce his monopoly. The bridge was the people's one hope for freedom, a way to connect to the mainland and break Gato's control. As such, Gato wanted Tazuna dead. The mission was not a simple escort, it was a high-stakes protection detail against a wealthy tyrant with an army of mercenaries. "This is beyond the scope of your mission," Kakashi said grimly to his team. "We should return to the village and report. This is an A- rank, possibly S-rank situation." Naruto looked at Tazuna's face. At the desperation and fear etched into his features. He saw the faces of the villagers in his own mind, people held hostage, their hope dwindling. It was a feeling he knew all too well. "No," Naruto said, his voice quiet but firm. "We're not leaving him." Sakura looked at Naruto, then at Tazuna, and her own resolve hardened. The vision she'd had during the bell test, of being a strong and capable kunoichi, flashed in her mind. He's right. We accepted the mission. We have to see it through. Kakashi looked at Sasuke, who just gave a curt nod. It would be troublesome to go back now. A spark of pride flickered in Kakashi's eye. They were foolish, idealistic, and in way over their heads. But they were a team. "All right," he said. "The mission continues." The rest of the journey was tense. They took a boat across the channel into wave country, the air growing thick with mist and the salty tang of the sea. As they passed under the shadow of a massive, half-finished bridge, a huge sword, spinning like a deadly pinwheel, came flying out of the fog. "Duck!" Kakashi yelled. They all hit the deck of the boat as the massive blade embedded itself in a tree trunk on the shore. A figure landed lightly on the hilt of the sword, his face covered in bandages, the symbol of Kurigakure slashed through on his forehead protector. Zabuza Momochi, the demon of the hidden mist, one of the 7 ninja swordsmen. This was no chunin. This was a legend. "Hand over the old man." Kakashi of the Sharingan. Zabuza's voice was a low growl, muffled by his bandages. "And I might let the children live." "Not happening," Kakashi said, his hand already lifting to reveal the swirling red eye that had earned him his name. Team, protection formation, defend the bridge builder. The battle that followed was a blur of water, steel, and blood. Zabuza was a force of nature, his skill with his massive blade and his mastery of water-style jutsu far beyond anything the genin had ever witnessed. Kakashi was a match for him, his Sharingan predicting and copying Zabuza's movements, but the fight was taking a toll. Then Zabuza trapped him. The water prison jutsu enveloped Kakashi in a sphere of inescapable, chakra-infused water. He was helpless, slowly drowning. "It's over, Kakashi," Zabuza sneered. "Now, my clones will deal with the rest of you." 4 water clones materialized, surrounding the genin and Tazuna. Fear, cold and sharp, lanced through Naruto. But then he remembered. He remembered the onigiri. He remembered the taste of teamwork, the feeling of his comrades at his side. He looked at Sasuke, who met his gaze, and a silent understanding passed between them. Their teamwork, forged by shared meals and a genuine, growing bond, was on full display. They moved with a synergy that belied their experience. Naruto's shadow clones created the chaos, a swarm of orange that drew the enemy's attention. Sakura, her mind sharp and clear, analyzed the clones, attack patterns, shouting out warnings and strategies. And Sasuke was the finisher, his fireball jutsu hissing through the mist, evaporating clone after clone. They fought their way to the real Zabuza, executing a plan Naruto had devised on the fly. He threw a Fuma shuriken, which Sasuke had disguised as one of his own shadow clones. Zabuza dodged it easily, but as it passed him, the shuriken transformed back into Naruto, who hurled a kunai that forced Zabuza to break the water prison to avoid being struck. Kakashi was free. The tide had turned. With a final, decisive blow, Kakashi defeated the exhausted Zabuza. But before he could land the finishing strike, 2 Senbon needles flew from the trees and embedded themselves in Zabuza's neck. He fell, seemingly dead. A young boy in a hunter nin mask appeared in the branches. "Thank you for your assistance," the boy said in a soft, melodic voice. "I have been tracking Zabuza for some time. I will dispose of the body." He vanished in a swirl of mist, taking Zabuza's body with him. The battle was over, but as Kakashi collapsed from Sharingan exhaustion, a seed of doubt was planted in his mind. Hunter nin usually destroyed a body on sight. And those Senbon, they were aimed to induce a death-like state, not to kill. They made it to Tazuna's house, Kakashi barely conscious, supported by his students. They were greeted by Tsunami, Tazuna's daughter, a kin-D woman whose face was etched with worry. In the corner sat her son, Inari, a small boy with a perpetually cynical scowl. "Thank you for bringing my father home," Tsunami said, bowing low. "We do not have much, but please, make yourselves at home." The house was clean but threadbare. A deep, pervasive sense of hopelessness clung to the walls like the damp mist outside. That evening, Tsunami prepared a simple meal of thin soup and rice. It was nourishment, but nothing more. It tasted of scarcity and resignation. Naruto took one bite and put his chopsticks down. He couldn't stand it. He looked at Tsunami's tired face, at Inari's silent, angry grief. He saw his own lonely childhood reflected in the boy's eyes. "Ma'am," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Please, allow me to cook tomorrow. Let me help." Tsunami looked surprised, but she saw the strange, earnest sincerity in the boy's blue eyes and nodded. The next day, Naruto took over the small kitchen. Using ingredients Tazuna had managed to scrounge from a neighbor, Naruto began to work his magic. He channeled all his empathy for this struggling family, all his fierce desire to protect their dream, into the food. The aroma that filled the house was different from the night before. It was rich, warm, and full of a promise that had long been absent from this home. He made a thick, hearty stew, rich with root vegetables and small pieces of savory fish. He baked a dense, dark bread that tasted of molasses and hope. When he served the meal, Tsunami took her first bite and her eyes filled with tears. She didn't have a grand vision. She simply tasted resilience. The flavor was the memory of her husband's unwavering belief in the people of Wave, the feeling of his strong hand in hers. It was the taste of a future where her son could grow up without fear. The food didn't erase her pain, but it rekindled the embers of her fighting spirit, a strength she thought had died with her husband, Kaiza. Inari, however, refused to eat. "It's just food," he spat, glaring at Naruto. "It won't change anything. Gato will still come. Heroes don't exist. Strong people just crush the weak. My father was a hero, and they killed him." He ran from the room, slamming the door behind him. Naruto didn't press him. Instead, he took his food to the bridge. He shared his meal with the handful of construction workers who had dared to show up. They were tired, scared men. Their shoulders slumped with defeat. They ate his food, and a change came over them. They stood a little straighter. The sound of their hammers on the steel frame of the bridge grew louder, more defiant. The work sped up. Naruto's kitchen became the heart of the resistance, his meals the fuel for a revolution of the spirit. Days passed. Kakashi, recovering under the influence of Naruto's restorative broths, began training the team in tree walking to improve their chakra control. Sakura, with her precise mind, mastered it first. Sasuke, driven by his rivalry, was close behind. Naruto struggled, his massive chakra reserves making the fine control difficult. One evening, he found Inari sitting alone on the dock, staring out at the mist-shrouded water. Naruto sat down beside him, not with a lecture, but with a single, warm rice ball. "I made it for you," he said simply. He had poured all his understanding of the boy's pain into this one small offering. He thought of his own lonely childhood, of his own desperate desire for a father figure like the third Hokage or Iruka-sensei. Inari stared at the rice ball, then at Naruto. He saw no pity in Naruto's eyes, only a shared understanding. Hesitantly, he took it and bit into it. The flavor was of salt, rice, and a father's embrace. He was on his father Kaisa's shoulders, laughing, the world a safe and wonderful place. He could hear his father's voice, not as a distant, painful memory, but as a living presence. "It's okay to cry, Inari. But true strength is protecting the things that are precious to you." The dam of his grief broke. He sobbed, deep, gut-wrenching sobs, leaning against Naruto, who simply put a comforting arm around his small, shaking shoulders. A few days later, venturing into the woods to practice, Naruto met a familiar figure. It was the hunter Nin from the battle, a boy with long dark hair and a gentle face, gathering medicinal herbs. The boy introduced himself as Haku. They talked, and Naruto felt a strange kinship with the other boy, sensing a deep sadness behind his serene smile. Before they parted, Naruto impulsively offered him one of the sweet, nut-filled dumplings he was carrying. "Here," he said, "for the road." Haku was surprised but accepted the gift with a graceful nod. Later, alone, he ate the small dumpling. The taste was of sweetness, warmth, and a shocking, brilliant possibility. He saw a flash, a vision of a world where his unique powers were not a curse that made him a tool for others, but a gift he could use to help people. He saw himself standing in a village, not as a weapon, but as a protector, surrounded by the warmth of acceptance, the very warmth he felt emanating from the strange orange-clad boy. The vision shook him to his core, planting a seed of doubt that would soon bear bitter fruit. The final confrontation came, as they knew it would, on the bridge. Mist rolled in, thick and unnatural. Zabuza and Haku stood waiting for them. The battle was fierce. Kakashi faced Zabuza, while Naruto and Sasuke were trapped inside Haku's demonic mirroring ice crystals. Haku's attacks were a blizzard of deadly Senbon, but something was different. There was a hesitation in his movements, a conflict in his eyes. He saw Naruto's desperate, unwavering will to protect Sasuke, and it was a mirror of his own devotion to Zabuza, but without the darkness, without the pain. It was the warmth from his vision. When Sasuke threw himself in front of Naruto, taking a volley of needles meant for him and collapsing in a death-like state, Naruto's grief and rage exploded, tapping into the Nine Tails chakra. But Haku couldn't deliver the final blow. He saw the warmth he craved being threatened, and his resolve shattered. On the main bridge, Kakashi had cornered Zabuza, his Chidori crackling, ready to end it. Haku, seeing Zabuza's life in danger, used the last of his strength to appear in front of him, taking the full force of Kakashi's lightning blade. Just then, Gato arrived with an army of thugs, laughing at the scene. He mocked the dead Haku and declared his intention to kill Zabuza and all the others, saving himself the trouble of paying. Zabuza stood frozen, looking at Haku's still form. He saw the tears streaming down Naruto's face for an enemy he had just been fighting. He heard Naruto's passionate words about Haku's devotion. The boy was right. Haku was never just a tool. The warmth that Naruto possessed, the warmth Haku had seen in his vision, that was the truth. With a kunai clenched in his teeth, the demon of the hidden mist made his final charge, carving a bloody path through Gato's men, a one-man army fueled by grief and a final, desperate act of love. In the aftermath, they buried the two mist ninjas side by side. The bridge was completed. The people of Wave, their spirits ignited, had taken back their home. They named their bridge the Great Naruto Bridge, in honor of the boy who had brought them not just victory, but hope. He was no longer just a ninja to them. He was a legend, the sage of the kitchen who had fed their courage. The story of the battle, of the boy whose cooking could rally a nation, was a tale the sailors and merchants of Wave would carry with them across the sea. It was a story too strange and too wonderful not to be told. As Team 7 stood at the newly bustling port, ready to return home, a sleek, dark wooded boat bearing the crest of Kurigakure pulled up to the dock. A ramp was lowered, and a single figure disembarked. It was a stunningly beautiful woman with long, auburn hair braided down her back, piercing green eyes, and a sad, knowing smile on her lips. She wore the formal blue robes of a Kiri diplomat. She approached them, her gaze passing over Kakashi and landing with an unnerving intensity on Naruto. "You must be Naruto Uzumaki," she said, her voice like honey and steel. "My name is Mei Terumi. I am an envoy from the Mizukage. The stories of your unique talents have traveled faster than we anticipated." She smiled, a hint of political maneuvering dancing in her eyes. "My village is still recovering from a long and terrible sickness of the soul. We have heard rumors that you know the cure." The world was getting bigger, and its problems were no longer so simple. Konoha's secret weapon was no longer a secret. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. A Symphony of Spice and Mist. The port at the Land of Waves was no longer a place of quiet desperation. It was a bustling hub of commerce and optimism, the sound of hammers on the Great Naruto Bridge a constant, rhythmic heartbeat of progress. Standing on the newly built dock, Mei Terumi was an island of elegant calm in the sea of activity. Her request, delivered with the silken, unyielding grace of a master diplomat, hung in the air, heavier than the sea mist. "An invitation to Kurigakure," Kakashi repeated, his one visible eye narrowed. He stepped forward slightly, placing himself between Mei and his students. "My team has just completed a grueling mission. They are exhausted, and my official orders are to return to Konoha immediately upon completion of our escort duty." Mei's smile didn't falter. It was a beautiful, disarming expression that did nothing to hide the shrewd intelligence in her eyes. "Of course, Kakashi of the Sharingan. We would not wish to inconvenience you. Consider it less a demand and more a gesture of goodwill between our villages. A chance for the famed Team 7 to see the new Kurigakure, a chance for us to learn from the young hero who inspired so much hope here." She paused, letting her words sink in. The acting Mizukage would be deeply disappointed to hear that Konoha was unwilling to share a hero who has already proven so effective at healing a wounded land. It might send the wrong message. It was a perfectly crafted political trap. To refuse would be a diplomatic insult, a suggestion that Konoha was hoarding its assets, and would be seen as an act of bad faith by a village they were desperately trying to keep as a neutral, if not friendly, power. Kakashi saw the dozen branching paths of the political fallout, and none of them were good. Before he could formulate a careful, diplomatic response, Naruto spoke up, his voice clear and guileless. "Your village is hurting." Mei's gaze shifted to him, softening slightly. "Our wounds are old and deep, Naruto-kun. For years, we were known as the village of the Bloody Mist. A civil war, a tyrant for a Mizukage, and a vicious purge of anyone with a bloodline limit. It has left a poison in our spirit. A paranoia that lingers like the fog itself." Naruto looked at Kakashi, then at Sakura and Sasuke. He didn't understand the political threats or the diplomatic nuances. He understood the words, wounds, and poison. He had spent his entire life feeling the effects of a village's poisoned spirit. "We'll go," he said, the decision simple and absolute in his mind. "If people are sick, and I can help, then we have to go." Kakashi let out a silent sigh. The boy was a political nightmare and a moral compass all rolled into one. He had just unilaterally committed them to an unsanctioned, high-risk mission in one of the most dangerous and politically unstable nations in the world. And yet, Kakashi couldn't bring himself to argue. "It seems my student has made up his mind," Kakashi said to Mei, his eye crinkling in a way that suggested a strained smile. "We would be honored to accept your invitation." The journey to Kurigakure was aboard Mei's swift ship. As they approached the Land of Water, the landscape changed. The air grew cooler. The trees became gnarled and ancient, and the mist was a living thing. It coiled around the jagged, rocky islands, muffling sound and swallowing the light. It was a far cry from the vibrant green of the land of fire. Kurigakure itself was a fortress, a city of sharp, brutalist architecture that seemed to rise from the water like a collection of stone daggers. The mist was thickest here, clinging to the streets and buildings, and the people who moved through it did so with their heads down, their eyes constantly scanning the shadows. The paranoia May had spoken of was a palpable force, a low-grade fever that infected the entire village. They were met by a man with a patch over his right eye and a stern, weathered face. May-sama, you've returned, he said, his voice a low growl. He gave Naruto and the others a suspicious, once-over. These are the Konoha shinobi. They are our honored guests. Ow, May said smoothly. This is Naruto Uzumaki, the boy I told you about. Ao grunted, his gaze lingering on Naruto. I've heard the ridiculous stories. A cook who can mend souls. Forgive me if I remain skeptical. Words are wind, but the scars in this village are stone. He was the voice of the old Kiri, a man who had survived by trusting no one and believing only in what he could see and kill. May led them to the Mizukage's tower, a towering spire that loomed over the village. The atmosphere inside was no warmer than the streets outside. Shinobi in the gray armor of Kiri watched them with open suspicion. Whispers followed them down the stone corridors. Konoha spies, what trick is this? The problem was made clear in the council chamber. May was not yet the official Mizukage. She was the leader of the rebel faction that had overthrown the bloody reign of Yagura. But her hold on power was tenuous. The village was fractured, and a powerful council of elders, traditionalists who had survived the old regime by being either ruthless enough or powerful enough to be untouchable, stood in her way. Their leader was a grizzled old shinobi named Kenshin, a man whose face looked like it was carved from granite. He and his contingent of the Old Guard confronted them the moment they were announced. May, what is the meaning of this? Kenshin demanded, his voice like grinding stones. He pointed a condemning finger at Naruto. You bring Konoha dogs into our council, into the heart of our village. After all the blood that has been spilled between us. And for what? A foolish rumor about a child who makes magical soup. His supporters murmured in agreement. Their hostility a tangible force in the room. He is here as a guest, Kenshin Dono, May countered, her voice calm but cold. He is here to offer a hand of friendship and aid in our recovery. We do not need the aid of outsiders. Kenshin spat, especially not one who practices some unknown, mind-bending jutsu. He is a spy, a tool of the Hokage sent to weaken us from within, and you are a fool for trusting him. The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Kakashi's hand moved subtly towards his weapon pouch. This was escalating far faster than he had anticipated. Naruto, however, stepped forward. All eyes turned to him. He wasn't looking at Kenshin with anger, but with a strange, sad understanding. He could feel the deep, festering wound of this village, the fear and hatred that these old men clung to like a shield. Arguing with them would be useless. Their minds were closed fortresses. But their hearts were just starving. You're right, Naruto said, his voice cutting through the tension. The entire council, including May, stared at him in shock. You shouldn't trust my words. And you shouldn't trust Konoha. You have no reason to. So don't. He turned to May. Do you have a large kitchen? And a dining hall? A place where everyone can eat together? May, catching the glint of a brilliant, insane strategy in his eyes, nodded slowly. We do. Good, Naruto said, turning back to the stunned council. Tonight, I will cook a meal. For all of you, for anyone in the village who wishes to come. You will eat, and then you will make your judgment. If you still believe I am your enemy after you have tasted my food, I will leave and never return. It was an audacious, unheard of challenge. To settle a political standoff not with a duel or a debate, but with a banquet. Kenshin and the old guard were so taken aback they could only stare. To refuse would make them look weak and fearful. With a contemptuous snort, Kenshin agreed. Very well, Konoha boy, he growled. We will indulge your little game. Prepare your trickery. We will be waiting. The kitchen was vast and ancient, all dark stone and gleaming copper pots. Naruto worked with a feverish intensity, directing Sakura and a handful of bewildered Kiri cooks May had assigned to him. Sasuke, surprisingly, stood guard at the door, his Sharingan activated, ensuring no one could tamper with the food. He wouldn't admit it, but he was invested now. This was his team's reputation on the line. Naruto didn't try to make anything fancy. This wasn't about individual enlightenment. This was about healing a community. He chose to make a massive nabe, a communal hot pot. He had several enormous cauldrons set up over roaring fires. The broth was the key. He used local ingredients, a deep, flavorful stock made from the kombu and fish bones pulled from Kiri's own waters. It was a broth that tasted of home. Into this simmering soul of the village, he added ingredients symbolic of its people. Hardy shellfish and crab that had to be cracked open to reveal their sweet meat, representing the hardened but resilient shinobi. Deep green sea vegetables that swayed with the current but never broke. And finally, a swirl of pungent, spicy miso paste, giving the broth a fiery kick of defiance. The aroma filled the great hall, a scent that was both deeply familiar and wonderfully new. Hundreds of Kiri shinobi, from grizzled veterans to suspicious genin, filled the benches, drawn by curiosity and the undeniable promise of a hot meal. Kenshin and the old guard sat at the head table, their faces grim masks of disapproval. Bowls were filled from the steaming cauldrons and passed down the long tables. There was a moment of hesitation, then, slowly, people began to eat. Kenshin took his first spoonful with a cynical sneer, expecting some overly sweet or pleasant flavor meant to lull him into a stupor. Instead, the taste was truth. It was the briny, iron-tinged taste of blood in the water. It was the bitterness of betrayal. It was the fiery agony of loss. The vision was not his alone. It swept through the entire hall, a shared memory that transcended individual experience. They were all standing on a misty shore, but the mist was red. They saw the faces of comrades they had been forced to kill during the bloodline purges. They saw the friends who had informed on them to save their own families. They saw the terror in the eyes of children branded as demons for their Kekkei Genkai. They were forced to confront the collective trauma they had all participated in, the ugly, bloody truth of what their village had become. It was an agony. Men began to weep openly, the hardened veterans of the bloody mist crying for the first time in decades. But then, as the last of the bitter broth was swallowed, the flavor changed. Underneath the blood and the grief, there was something else. It was the taste of the sea, vast and cleansing. It was the flavor of the unshakable bedrock beneath their island. It was the taste of resilience. The vision changed. The red mist began to thin, washed away by a clean, salty rain. The faces of the dead did not vanish, but they were no longer accusatory. They were peaceful. The shared agony gave way to a shared catharsis. A sense of communal grief, and then, a flicker of communal hope. They were all survivors of the same storm. They were all still here. Kenshin looked down at his empty bowl, his hands trembling. He looked up, his old, hard eyes filled with tears, and met the gaze of a man across the hall, a shinobi whose brother he had been forced to execute years ago. There was no hatred in the man's eyes. Only a shared, profound sorrow. The walls between them, built over years of paranoia and bloodshed, had been washed away. He looked at Naruto, who was standing by the cauldrons, his face smudged with soot, looking exhausted but calm. He was not a spy. He was not a trickster. He was a healer of the most profound kind. Later that night, Mei requested a private dinner with Naruto in her offices. The council has withdrawn its objections, she said, a tone of wonder in her voice. Kenshin, he apologized. I have never seen that man apologize for anything. You have done more to unite this village in one evening than I have managed in a year. They were just hungry, Naruto said with a shrug. Mei smiled. They were starving for more than just food. She sat at her table. Now, Naruto-kun, cook for me. I want to understand what you showed them. For Mei, he made something different. It was a single, elegant dish. A perfectly steamed sea bass, its skin crisp, served on a bed of bright green seaweed and topped with a sauce made from sharp, citrusy yuzu and a hint of fiery chili. It was a symphony of spice and mist, a dish that was both beautiful and dangerous, much like the woman herself. She took a bite. The flavors were a dance on her tongue. The clean taste of the fish, the salty umami of the seaweed, the bright spark of the citrus, and the lingering, pleasant heat of the chili. Her vision was not of the past. It was of the future. She stood on the highest point of the Mizukage's tower, but the oppressive mist was gone. A bright, clear sun shone down on Kurigakure. The village below was vibrant, the streets filled with laughing people. The architecture was still sharp, but it looked proud now, not menacing. She saw new academies where children with bloodline limits practiced their gifts openly, celebrated for their uniqueness. She saw Kiri shinobi standing side by side with shinobi from other villages, true allies. She saw a path forward. A clear, brilliant road out of the darkness, a vision of the village she was fighting to build. It gave her more than hope. It gave her certainty. The lingering doubts, the immense pressure of her position, the fear of failure, it all vanished, burned away by the bright clarity of this vision. She knew what to do. She opened her eyes, a single, determined tear tracing a path down her cheek. She looked at Naruto with an expression of absolute, unwavering conviction. "You are not just a hero, Naruto Uzumaki," she said, her voice filled with a quiet power. "You are a kingmaker." Danzo Shimura received the report in the dead of night. It was delivered by a rude operative who had been smuggled into Kiri. The report was stark and unbelievable. The Jinchuri, he had not just survived the political hornet's nest, he had tamed it. He had united the warring factions of Kurigakure. Mei Terumi's position was now unassailable. He had forged an alliance through a single meal. The threat assessment had just skyrocketed. Naruto Uzumaki was no longer an internal problem. He was a global political force in the making, capable of reshaping international relations with a cooking pot. He could not be allowed to return to Konoha with the official backing of the Mizukage. The risk was too great. "He has forced my hand," Danzo whispered to the shadows of his cold chamber. He gave a single, curt nod to his operative. "Send the Scythe team. Eliminate the target. Make it look like the work of Kiri loyalists who refuse to accept the new regime. There must be no connection to Konoha. Failure is not an option." The attack came 2 nights later, under the cover of a moonless sky and the thick Kiri mist. Naruto was asleep in the guest quarters he'd been given when his danger senses, honed by years of surviving a hostile village, screamed a warning. He rolled off his bed a split second before 3 black-clad figures smashed through his window. They moved without a sound, their faces hidden by blank, white masks. They weren't Kiri shinobi. They had the cold, dead precision of puppets. Root. Naruto dodged and weaved, kunai in hand, but he was outnumbered and outmatched. These were not chunin. They were elite assassins, their movements a symphony of deadly, coordinated strikes. Suddenly, the wall of the adjoining room exploded inwards. "Mind transfer jutsu," a familiar voice yelled. One of the assassins froze mid-strike, then crumpled to the ground as Ino's consciousness was violently ejected. She stood in the doorway, panting, a fierce glare on her face. Beside her, Tenten stood, her hands a blur as she unsealed a massive scroll. "What are you guys doing here?" Naruto yelled in shock. "Lord Hokage might be a politician, but Lady Tsunade is a pragmatist," Tenten said, not taking her eyes off the remaining 2 assassins. She suspected something might happen. "We were sent as unofficial insurance." "Rising Dragon," Tenten roared. A whirlwind of kunai, shuriken, and weighted chains erupted from her scroll, filling the room with a storm of steel. It was no longer a simple barrage. It was a calculated, 3-dimensional attack pattern, each weapon's trajectory designed to hem the enemy in, a perfect cage of flying blades. Her vision in Naruto's kitchen had given her a god's eye view of her own arsenal. The 2 root agents moved with inhuman speed, deflecting the storm. But they were pinned down. Ino, meanwhile, wasn't just a spectator. Her hands flew through seals. Mind disturbance jutsu. The remaining assassins faltered for a split second, their coordination breaking as their own bodies threatened to betray them. That was all the opening they needed. 2 Kiri Anbu, led by Ao, smashed through the door. For the Mizukage, Ao roared, his borrowed Byakugan already blazing. They moved to flank the root agents, hemming them in. Outnumbered and their surprise lost, the root agents made a decision. They bit down on something in their mouths. Their bodies began to glow with a sickly purple light. "They're going to blow themselves up," Kakashi yelled, appearing in the ruined window frame. "Get down." But it was too late. The LTING explosion tore the side of the guest house apart. When the smoke cleared, the root agents were gone, leaving nothing behind but scorched stone and the lingering, foul taste of their chakra. Ao scanned the wreckage with his Byakugan. Their chakra, it was from the land of fire. But it was twisted, sealed, designed to leave no trace. He looked at Kakashi, a new, grim understanding in his eye. This was not the work of Kiri rebels. This was an internal affair from your own village. The failed assassination had done the opposite of what Danzo intended. It had not severed the tie between Naruto and Mei. It had forged it in the fire of a shared enemy. Mei now had proof of a shadow faction within Konoha working against her, and a personal debt to the boy who had not only saved her village's soul, but had nearly been murdered under her protection. Naruto, Ino, and Tenten stood at the port once more, this time preparing to truly leave. Mei Terumi stood before them, no longer just a diplomat, but the newly inaugurated Godime Mizukage, her authority absolute. Konoha owes you a great debt, Naruto-kun, she said, her voice full of a warmth that was now genuine. And so do I. Kurigakure will not forget what you have done. If you ever need an ally, if you ever find your enemies are closer to home than you thought, know that the village hidden in the mist stands with you. It was a declaration of an official, personal alliance, unprecedented, world-changing. Naruto returned to Konoha not just as a genin who had completed a mission. He returned as a political figure, a kingmaker, with the unofficial but ironclad backing of a cage from another great nation. The stakes of his life, his gift, and the dangers he faced had been raised to a level he could never have imagined. The world was watching him now, and so were its shadows. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Taste of the Chunin Exams. The air in Konoha crackled with a new kind of energy. Banners bearing the symbols of the 5 great nations hung from rooftops. Foreign shinobi walked the streets with wary confidence, and the entire village buzzed with the anticipation of the upcoming Chunin exams. For Naruto, returning from the land of waves, the change was jarring. He had left as a genin on a C-rank mission and returned as the architect of an international alliance, a fact that had sent shockwaves through the Hokage Tower. The meeting with the newly inaugurated Hokage, Tsunade Senju, had been a whirlwind. She had stormed into the office of the late third Hokage like a tempest, taken one look at the stacks of paperwork, and immediately called for a bottle of the finest sake. When Naruto, Kakashi, Ino, and Tenten were ushered in to give their report, she listened with a skeptical scowl, her fingers drumming impatiently on the desk. She'd heard the reports, of course. Hirazen's council had painted Naruto as a dangerous variable. The mission report from Kurigakure read like a work of fiction. But as she listened to the earnest report from Kakashi, the sharp strategic analysis from Ino, and saw the unwavering loyalty in Tenten's eyes, her skepticism began to wane. This wasn't mass hysteria. This was a tactical asset. So let me get this straight, Tsunade said, leaning back in her chair and taking a long swig of sake directly from the bottle. You're telling me this kid, with food, ended a decade-long cycle of paranoia, averted a civil war, and secured us a personal alliance with the Godime Mizukage. That's the short version. Yes, Kakashi said, his eye crinkling. Tsunade looked at Naruto, who just offered a nervous grin. She saw the boy, the vessel of the 9 tails, the dead last her old sensei had worried over. But she also saw the faint, golden aura of something else, a potent life force that even her legendary medical senses could barely comprehend. Danzo had seen a threat. She saw a weapon. A very, very strange one, but a weapon nonetheless. The council's directive stands, she declared, slamming the bottle down. The paperwork is a bureaucratic nightmare, but it gives us cover. We'll follow the rules. She then gave Ino a sly, conspiratorial wink. But I expect your team's, culinary development sessions to be filed with meticulous detail. I want to know the exact nutritional and morale-boosting effects of every, dumpling. The Chunin exams were the perfect stage. It was a chance for Konoha to display its strength, and Tsunade intended to put her strangest new asset on full display. The first part of the exam was a written test, held in a vast, intimidating class room filled with genin from every village. The proctor, Ibiki Morino, the scar-faced head of Konoha's torture and interrogation force, explained the rules with sadistic glee. It was a test of information gathering. Cheating was expected, but getting caught meant instant disqualification for the entire team. Naruto stared at the impossibly difficult questions on his test paper, sweat beading on his brow. He didn't know the answer to a single one. But as he looked across the room, he saw Sakura, her brow furrowed in concentration, her pen flying across the page. He saw Sasuke, his Sharingan subtly activated, not copying answers, but reading the subtle muscle movements of the hidden proctors, mapping their lines of sight. They had prepared for this. The night before, in his kitchen, Naruto had made them a special pre-exam meal. It wasn't a grand vision-inducing feast. It was a light, clear broth filled with ginkgo nuts and thin slices of a fish known to improve memory and mental acuity. Chi was food designed for absolute clarity. Sakura didn't need to cheat. She had committed entire textbooks to memory. Sasuke wasn't stealing answers, he was gathering tactical data on their observers. Naruto's role was the simplest. To be the perfect, clueless dead last, drawing the proctor's attention away from his more subtle teammates. Their teamwork was a silent, well-oiled machine. They passed, not by breaking the rules, but by mastering the game. The second stage was held in the Forest of Death, a place of monstrous creatures and palpable dread. The proctor, Anko Mitarashi, was a wild, boisterous woman who seemed perfectly at home in the lethal environment. The objective: survive for 5 days and collect one of 2 scrolls, heaven or earth, from another team. "Before you go, Naruto," said as they stood before the ominous gates, a little snack. He passed them each a small, tightly wrapped packet. It contained a type of dense, savory mochi, studded with nuts and dried meat. It was a concentrated burst of energy, designed for stamina and endurance. As soon as the exam started, they were a different team from the scared genin who had first faced Zabuza. Their movements were coordinated. Sakura's strategic mind, sharpened by Naruto's cooking, directed their path. Sasuke's powerful jutsu and keen eyes acted as their sword and shield. And Naruto, with his shadow clones and boundless energy, was their engine. They acquired their needed scroll within hours, overwhelming a team of rain ninja with a perfectly executed combination attack. But they didn't head for the tower. "The or other teams in here who need help," Naruto said, his expression serious. "We have time." It was a radical idea. The exam was a competition, a zero-sum game. But Naruto's philosophy, reinforced by his gift, was different. A stronger Konoha meant stronger comrades. He couldn't cook for them directly, the Hokage's directive forbade it. But, as Ino had pointed out, there were loopholes. As they traveled, Naruto would leave behind small caches of the energy-boosting mochi at the base of trees or near streams. Shikamaru, Choji, and Ino, exhausted and cornered by a team of sound ninja, would happen to find a perfectly good, untouched supply of rations. The boost it gave them was enough to turn the tide. Kiba, Shino, and Hinata, lost and running low on supplies, would stumble upon another cache. It was an act of anonymous generosity that sent ripples through the Konoha genin. They weren't just competing against each other, a mysterious benefactor was trying to ensure they all succeeded. It was during one of these supply drops that Naruto came face to face with true dread. He was alone, setting a small trap to protect a cache of food, when a chilling, sand-filled wind swept through the trees. He turned to see them, the Sand siblings. Kankuro and Temari stood back, their expressions a mixture of arrogance and caution. But it was the third figure, the boy with the gourd on his back in the dark, sleepless rings around his eyes, who froze the blood in Naruto's veins. Gaara. The air around him was thick with bloodlust and a loneliness so profound it was a physical force. Naruto could feel the screaming, hateful presence of the beast within him, a mirror of his own sealed demon, but twisted, broken, and utterly consumed by rage. Gaara's pale, turquoise eyes fixed on Naruto, devoid of any emotion save a cold, murderous curiosity. "You have something I want." Gaara's voice was a dry, rasping whisper, like sand scraping against bone. He wasn't talking about the scroll. He was talking about the look in Naruto's eyes. The look of someone who wasn't afraid. "Your life." Before he could move, a massive snake slammed into the clearing, followed by the terrifying presence of Orochimaru. The Sannin's encounter with Team 7 was brutal and swift. He was there for Sasuke, to test him, to brand him with his cursed seal. As Orochimaru's impossibly long neck extended towards Sasuke, Naruto reacted on pure instinct. He didn't just attack with jutsu. He threw one of the last mochi packets he had, hurling it with all his might. It struck Orochimaru's cheek with a soft thump. It was a ridiculous, pathetic gesture. Orochimaru paused, a flicker of amusement in his serpentine eyes. He licked the sticky residue from his face. For the briefest of instants, a flicker of something, a memory of a warm bowl of soup his sensei, Hiruzen, had once made for him as a child, flashed through his mind. It was a taste of a light he had long since abandoned. The flicker of confusion was all Sasuke needed to counterattack. The fight still ended with Sasuke branded and the team terrified and broken. But that one absurd act had planted a seed. After Orochimaru was gone, and Sasuke was writhing in agony from the curse mark, Naruto found the Sand siblings still there, watching from a distance. Gaara's cold eyes were fixed on the discarded wrapper from the mochi Naruto had thrown. A faint, enticing aroma still clung to it. Driven by a strange compulsion he didn't understand, Naruto walked towards them. Temari and Kankuro tensed, ready for a fight. "Stay back," Temari warned. Naruto ignored them. He walked right up to Gaara, who watched him with the unnerving stillness of a predator. He held out his last piece of mochi. It was an act of pure, unadulterated empathy. He saw a fellow Jinchuriki, a soul in unimaginable pain. And he responded in the only way he knew how. Gaara stared at the offering, then at Naruto's outstretched hand. He felt the ceaseless, murderous whispers of Shukaku in his mind, urging him to kill. To crush, to destroy this boy who dared to approach him. But he also felt something else. The boy wasn't afraid. He was offering. No one had ever offered Gaara anything but fear. Slowly, hesitantly, he took the mochi. He brought it to his lips and ate it. The taste was simple, sweet rice, savory meat. But the effect was a cataclysm. For the first time in Gaara's conscious memory, the voice of Shukaku went silent. The unending, screaming litany of hatred, the constant pressure of the sand armor, the gnawing insomnia, for one glorious, terrifying second, it all stopped. There was only silence. A deep, profound, peaceful silence. It was more shocking than any pain, more frightening than any enemy. It was a taste of the peace he had never known was possible. The silence lasted only a moment before Shukaku's rage came roaring back, furious at being suppressed. But the memory of it remained. Gaara stumbled back, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and a desperate, agonizing craving. He looked at Naruto, not as a target, but as the source of that impossible miracle. Then, without a word, he turned and vanished into the trees, his siblings scrambling to follow. The preliminary matches were a brutal affair. The survivors of the forest were pitted against each other in one-on-one combat. It was here that Naruto faced his great moral dilemma. He saw Ino preparing for her match against Sakura. He saw Choji nervously psyching himself up. He saw Hinata, standing opposite her fearsome cousin, Neji. He had the power to help them. He could cook the meal that would show them the path to victory, that would fill them with an unshakable fighting spirit. It would be so easy. Ino found him in the waiting area, mixing a simple healing salve of herbs. "What are you making?" she asked. "Some kind of super soldier soup for my match." Naruto shook his head. "This is for after," he said quietly. "For whoever gets hurt. Your fight is your own. Your strength is your own. It wouldn't be a real victory if I just handed it to you." It was a profound statement of respect. He trusted them. He believed in their own strength, a strength he had helped them uncover. But that was ultimately theirs. It was a critical step in his own growth, a realization that his gift was not a tool for control, but a catalyst for empowerment. He watched the matches, his fists clenched. Sakura and Ino fought to a spectacular double knockout, a testament to their newfound respect for each other's strength. Hinata, though she lost to Neji, fought with a courage and confidence that stunned the entire Hyuga clan. She stood up to his philosophy of a predetermined fate and showed him the strength of a will that refused to be broken. And after each brutal match, Naruto was there with a restorative broth or a healing poultice that mended broken bones and soothed battered spirits far faster than any standard field medicine. He was not a competitor. He was the heart of the Konoha 11. The day of the final rounds arrived. The stadium was packed. The cage sat beside the Hokage. The air was thick with tension and excitement. Then the invasion began. Feathers rained down, lulling the crowd to sleep. Orochimaru made his move, trapping the Hokage in a barrier. Giant snakes smashed through the stadium walls. Sound and sand ninja poured into the village. Chaos erupted. The Jonin were spread thin, trying to counter the initial assault. The village's defenses were scattered, disorganized. Panic began to set in. Amidst the screaming and the explosions, Ino, Shikamaru, and Sakura found Naruto. "What do we do?" Sakura yelled over the roar of a rampaging snake. It was Ino who saw the path. Her mind, unlocked by Naruto's cooking, saw the strategic map of the battle. "We can't fight them head-on. We're too scattered. We need to rally them," she shouted. "Naruto, your kitchen, now." It was an insane order in the middle of a war zone. But it was the right one. They fought their way back to Naruto's small restaurant. Ino relayed orders through her mind-body transmission jutsu to other genin, directing them to fall back and form a defensive perimeter. Tenten arrived, her scrolls already open. "Heard you were throwing a party," she yelled, unleashing a spiraling vortex of steel that shredded a squad of invading sand nin. Hinata appeared at her side, her Byakugan active, calling out enemy positions. 8 hostiles, northeast quadrant, closing fast. Inside, Naruto worked like a man possessed. He wasn't making intricate dishes. He threw the largest pot he had onto the stove and began creating a potent, fast-acting, battle broth. He used ingredients known for their restorative and stimulating properties, high-energy roots, chakra-replenishing herbs, and a powerful, spicy chili base that could shock a person's system into high alert. The aroma began to cut through the smoke and dust of the battle. It was a smell of defiance. Choji and other genin acted as runners, filling canteens with the steaming, pungent liquid and racing to the front lines. A Chunin, his arm broken, his will shattered, took a gulp. The heat of the broth seared through him, but with it came a surge of energy. The fog of fear in his mind cleared, replaced by a sharp, defiant clarity. His chakra reserves, nearly depleted, felt a sudden, miraculous surge. He looked at his comrades, saw the same fire rekindled in their eyes, and with a roar, he rejoined the battle. Naruto's kitchen became the heart of the resistance. It was the unofficial command center, the field hospital, and the mess hall all in one. He stood amidst the chaos, ladle in hand, a whirlwind of focused energy. He wasn't on the front lines throwing Rasengans. He was doing something far more important. He was feeding the will of his village to fight back. As the sun began to set on the battered but unbroken village, the invaders were in retreat. The third Hokage lay dead, but Konoha still stood. From the rooftop of his small restaurant, Naruto looked out over the smoke-filled streets. He was exhausted, covered in soot and spilled soup, but his heart was full. He hadn't won the Chunin exams. He had saved his home. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. A meal fit for a Sannin. The rain began the day after the invasion ended. A slow, persistent drizzle that washed the blood from the cobblestones and turned the omnipresent dust of destruction into dark, clinging mud. It was a somber baptism for a village in mourning. Konoha had won, but the cost was etched onto every standing wall and into the haunted eyes of every shinobi. The will of fire had not been extinguished, but it flickered low, a guttering candle in a harsh wind. At the center of the quiet, determined rebuilding effort was a small resto rant that still smelled faintly of defiant spice. Naruto's kitchen had not closed. It had become the village's heart. He worked from before dawn until long after the rain-soaked dusk, a tireless engine of warmth and sustenance. He didn't sleep. He cooked. Huge vats of restorative kanji for the wounded in the overflowing hospital, nutrient-dense stews for the exhausted construction crews clearing rubble, and simple, warm cups of broth for the families huddled in the temporary shelters. He wasn't making miracle meals. There were no grand visions, no sudden epiphanies. This was a different kind of magic. It was the simple, profound magic of a hot meal on a cold day, of a full stomach in a time of scarcity. He was cooking with the pure, unwavering intent to heal his home, and every bite taken by the villagers was a small act of communion, a shared refusal to break. It was during one of these gray, rain-slicked afternoons that a giant of a man with a wild mane of white hair and red lines painted down his face appeared in the doorway of the restaurant. He was an intimidating presence, his sheer size and the immense, playful power that rolled off him in waves making the weary shinobi inside tense up. He surveyed the scene, the genin running bowls of soup, the exhausted Chunin eating in grateful silence, and the orange-clad boy at the center of it all, ladle in hand, with an expression of profound curiosity. "So," a booming, gravelly voice echoed through the room. "You're the brat who fights with a ladle." Naruto looked up, startled. He knew this man. He was one of the Sannin, the legendary toad sage, Jiraiya. He'd seen his face on statues and in history books. "And you're the pervy sage who writes those weird books Kakashi-sensei is always reading," Naruto shot back without thinking, his exhaustion making him bold. A few of the younger shinobi choked on their soup. Jiraiya, however, threw his head back and let out a hearty laugh that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. "Ha, the brat's got spirit, I'll give him that." Jiraiya took a seat at the counter, his presence so large it seemed to shrink the room. He accepted a bowl of the stew Naruto was serving and took a long, appraising taste. He chewed thoughtfully, his gaze never leaving Naruto. The flavor was excellent, rich and restorative. But underneath it, he felt something else. A warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. It was the boy's stubborn, indomitable will, somehow infused into the broth itself. Jiraiya had traveled the world, tasted 1,000 exotic dishes, and experienced 100 strange jutsu. He had never encountered anything like this. "The old-timers on the council are losing their minds over you," Jiraiya said, his voice lower now. "Homura and Kaharu think you're a security risk. Danzo thinks you're a weapon that needs to be pointed or put down. And Sarutobi-sensei, he just didn't know what to think." He took another spoonful of stew. "They're fools. They're trying to fit a whirlwind into a teacup." The village elders, in the wake of the third Hokage's death, had offered Jiraiya the hat. He had refused instantly. The paperwork, the politics, the suffocating responsibility. It was a cage he would never willingly enter. But Konoha needed a leader, and there was only one other viable candidate. "There's one other person who can take the job," Jiraiya said, his expression turning serious. "Another Sannin, the world's greatest medical ninja, and the world's biggest sucker. Her name is Tsunade, and you, brat, are going to help me drag her back here." "Me? Why me?" Naruto asked, confused. "Because I need to see this power of yours in action, away from all this," Jiraiya said, gesturing around the makeshift community center. "And because if anyone can get through that thick, stubborn, grief-soaked skull of hers, it might just be the one person in the world who's as stubborn as she is." He grinned. "Besides, it's a good excuse to get you out of the village for some real training." The journey was an education. Jiraiya was a hurricane of contradictions, a lecherous fool one moment and a terrifyingly perceptive shinobi the next. He pushed Naruto's training to the brink, teaching him the fundamentals of the Rasengan, a jutsu that required the highest level of shape manipulation and chakra control. As they traveled from one gambling den to the next, tracking Tsunade's trail of debts and broken promises, Jiraiya told stories. He spoke of his old team, of a younger, more idealistic Orochimaru, and of a brilliant, fiery Tsunade who loved her village with a fierce passion. He spoke of her little brother, Nawaki, who had dreamed of being Hokage, and of her lover, Dan Kato, who had shared that same dream. "They both died," Jiraiya said one night, his voice uncharacteristically somber as they sat around a campfire. "Nawaki in the war, Dan a few years later. Both of them chasing that dream. She put all her hope into them, and they were torn away from her. The Hokage's necklace she gave them, she started to see it as a curse. After Dan died, she lost her faith. Not just in the dream, but in the village itself. She walked away from it all. But Jiraiya's spy network was vast, and his concerns went beyond Konoha's leadership. The Akatsuki are on the move," he told Naruto, his voice low and serious. "They're hunting the Jinchuriki. They'll come for you eventually. But they're not the only monsters out there." He stared into the fire, his expression grim. "My sources in the quieter corners of the world speak of other things. Pale men who move between the stars. They don't conquer, Naruto. They consume. They drain planets of their life force. And the strangest thing, they say these beings are drawn to places with a potent, unique energy signature." He looked at Naruto, his gaze intense. "When I hear that, and then I hear the stories about what you can do with a simple bowl of rice. It makes the hairs on my neck stand up. I think your gift, whatever it is, might be a dinner bell ringing across dimensions. They found her in Tanzaku Quarters, a town famous for its casinos and hedonism. Tsunade Senju, the legendary slug princess, was a mess. She was drunk, furious at her losing streak, and radiating an aura of cynical despair. When Jiraiya made his offer, she laughed in his face. Hokage, you must be joking, she slurred, slamming her fist on the table. It's a fool's game, a title for idealists who die for nothing. Why would I want to protect a village that's nothing but a collection of painful memories? Her gaze fell on Naruto, and her lip curled in a sneer. And you brought the nine-tails brat with you, still spouting that nonsense about becoming Hokage, I bet. Dreams are for children. In the real world, they just get you killed. The confrontation escalated. Words turned to blows. Orochimaru, drawn by the scent of a potential new vessel in Sasuke, made his appearance. The three Sannin, fractured and broken, faced each other in a clearing outside the town. It was a battle of legends, a clash that tore the earth asunder. Naruto, desperate to protect Tsunade, managed to land a clumsy but effective Rasengan on Orochimaru's fearsome apprentice. Kabuto, but it was Tsunade who was truly tested. Faced with Orochimaru's offer to bring her loved ones back to life, she was forced to confront her past. And when she saw Naruto, battered and bleeding but still fighting to protect her and the Hokage's necklace she had given him, something inside her broke. She conquered her hemophobia, her debilitating fear of blood, and stood to fight as the Sannin Konoha remembered. They drove Orochimaru away, but the victory was a hollow one. They were all wounded, exhausted, and the fundamental conflict remained. Tsunade was still a woman adrift in her own grief. That night, in the quiet inn where they were recovering, Naruto knew that no jutsu, no argument, could heal the real wound. He went to the inn's small kitchen. Shizune, Tsunade's faithful apprentice, found him there, washing rice. What are you doing, Naruto-kun? She asked, her voice tired. Lady Tsunade is hurting, he said simply, his hands moving with a practiced, gentle grace. I'm going to make her dinner. He didn't know what Naoki or Dan had liked to eat. He didn't have any rare, mystical ingredients. He had only the stories Jiraiya had told him. A deep well of empathy for a pain he was beginning to understand, and the simple, wholesome ingredients from the inn's pantry. He decided to make nikujaga, a simple, humble stew of meat, potatoes, and vegetables simmered in a sweet and savory broth. It was not a dish for a kage or a sannin. It was a dish for a family. It was the taste of home. As he cooked, he poured all of his understanding into the pot. He thought of Naoki's bright, childish dream and Dan's quiet, steadfast hope. He thought of Tsunade's fierce love for them, a love that had curdled into a shield of cynicism. He didn't try to cook away her pain. That would be a lie. Instead, he cooked to honor it. He infused the broth with respect for her grief, with gratitude for her strength, and with his own unwavering, almost foolish belief that dreams were still worth fighting for. He brought the single, steaming bowl to her room. She was sitting by the window, staring out at the moon, a bottle of sake in her hand. She looked at the bowl with disdain. I'm not hungry, she said, her voice flat. Please, Naruto said, his voice quiet but insistent. Just one bite. Tsunade looked from the boy's earnest, pleading face to the simple, unpretentious bowl of stew. With a weary sigh, more to make him leave than anything else, she took the bowl and dipped her chopsticks into it. She lifted a piece of potato to her lips and ate it. The taste was of soy sauce, sweet mirin, and memory. She was in her family's kitchen, years ago. The sun was streaming through the window. She was a young woman, not yet a legend, laughing, as she tried to teach her clumsy little brother how to peel potatoes. Naoki was complaining, a smudge of dirt on his nose, his eyes shining with the dream he had just declared to her. When I'm Hokage, I'll have people to peel my potatoes for me. The scene shifted. She was in a small apartment, sharing a meal with Dan after a long day at the hospital. He was telling her about his plans for the village. For a future where every team had a medical ninja, a future where no more children like Naoki had to die. He ate the same simple stew with a quiet, grateful appreciation. The flavor was of his gentle strength, his unwavering hope. The vision wasn't a painful haunting. It was a gift. Nawaki and Dan were there, not as ghosts, but as they were in her heart, young, vibrant, and full of love. They turned to her, and they were smiling. The Hokage necklace around Nawaki's neck wasn't a symbol of death. It was a symbol of their shared dream. Don't let our dream die with us, Tsunade, their voices echoed, not in her ears, but in her soul. It's your turn now. Carry it for us. The vision faded. Tsunade was back in the quiet inn room, the bowl of stew cradled in her hands. The first sob was a choked, strangled thing. A sound torn from a place that had been locked away for decades. Then another. Tears, hot and unrestrained, streamed down her face, splashing into the broth. She wept for her brother, for her love, for the years she had spent running from their memory. The cynical armor she had built around her heart shattered, washed away by a flood of grief that was, finally, allowed to be pure. Shizune rushed to her side, wrapping her arms around her master's shaking shoulders. Naruto stood back, his heart aching for her. He had not healed her. He had simply given her permission to feel the wound. Tsunade Senju's return to Konoha was the turning point. She accepted the title of Godime Hokage, her shoulders now strong enough to bear the weight of the hat and the legacy it represented. Her first official council meeting was a short one. When Danzo and the elders tried to assert their influence, to guide the newcomer, Tsunade slammed her fist on the Hokage's desk, cracking the ancient wood from end to end. "Let's be clear," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute command. "Hiruzen's time is over. This is my village now. You will advise when I ask for it. Otherwise, you will carry out my orders." Her first order was to summon Naruto to the council chamber. He arrived, nervous, flanked by the old guard who still viewed him with deep suspicion. He directive regarding your unique abilities is a political and administrative mess, Tsunade declared, her voice ringing with authority. "But it stands, for now. However, it is incomplete. It classifies the risk, but it fails to classify the asset." She stood, her presence filling the room. "As of today, by the decree of the Godime Hokage, Naruto Uzumaki is hereby designated a village treasure of the highest order. His skills are a strategic asset to the health, morale, and combat effectiveness of Konohagakure. He is to be afforded the respect and protection of that station. Any unauthorized action taken against him will be considered an act of treason." She looked directly at Danzo, a silent, unmistakable challenge. Then her gaze softened as she looked at Naruto. "You need a title," she said, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time. "Something befitting your station." She thought for a moment. "They have the Toad Sage, the Slug Princess, the Copy Ninja." Her smile widened. "From this day forward, in the official records of Konohagakure, you will be known as Naruto Uzumaki, the culinary sage of Konoha." Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Coming Storm's Appetite. 2 years passed. They were years of fragile, diligent peace, of a village binding its own wounds and rediscovering its strength under the decisive, if occasionally sake-fueled, leadership of the Godime Hokage. The scars on the buildings faded under the tireless work of reconstruction, and the scars on the people's hearts began to mend, soothed by a slow, steady return to normalcy. At the epicenter of this quiet renaissance was a place that had become more than just a restaurant. It was now an institution. The hearth, Naruto's establishment, was the vibrant, beating heart of the new Konoha. Its doors were never locked. Shinobi returning from missions would stop there before even reporting to the tower, seeking a bowl of something warm to wash away the dust of the road. Civilians and ninja alike shared its long, communal tables. The old, invisible walls between them dissolving in the shared joy of a good meal. Naruto himself had changed. The loud, boisterous boy was still there, a bright spark in his blue eyes. But he was tempered now with a quiet, solid confidence. He moved with the unhurried grace of a master in his domain, his hands, once clumsy with jutsu seals, now deft and certain as they chopped, stirred, and plated. He was no longer the village pariah seeking acknowledgement. He was a pillar of the community, a leader who had earned his station not with power, but with provision. He was the culinary sage, and the title, once a political designation, had become a simple truth. His clan had solidified around him, no longer just a group of friends, but a respected and formidable faction in their own right. Ino, with her sharp, strategic mind, acted as his unofficial chief of staff, managing the restaurant's logistics, cultivating political ties, and using the Th as the most effective intelligence-gathering hub in the Land of Fire. Sakura, now a formidable medical ninja and Tsunade's prized apprentice, was a regular presence, her scientific curiosity about Naruto's gift leading to groundbreaking discoveries in the field of chakra-infused nutrition and cellular regeneration. Tenten had become a legend. Her title was the Arsenal, and her skill, honed by a deeper understanding of her craft, was unparalleled. She had established a world-renowned forge and workshop adjacent to the hearth, her custom-made ninja tools sought after by shinobi from every nation. And Hinata was the hearth's silent, watchful guardian. She had grown into a stunningly graceful woman, her quiet demeanor now a sign of immense inner strength, not timidity. Her mastery of the gentle fist had evolved. She fought not to break, but to protect, her movements a fluid, beautiful dance of deflection and defense. She was the calm at the center of their vibrant world, her unwavering faith in Naruto a palpable grounding force. Their relationships, particularly Naruto's with the women who formed his core, had deepened beyond the initial, startling moments of their awakenings. The supernatural pull of his food had opened the door, but the bonds that had formed were built on a foundation of shared years, of mutual respect, of late-night conversations over leftover stew, and of fighting side by side to protect the home they had built together. It was a complex, interwoven tapestry of love, loyalty, and partnership. One quiet evening, after the last of the customers had departed, leaving behind the pleasant, lingering scent of roasted tea and miso, Naruto found Hinata on the restaurant's small rooftop garden, tending to a bed of rare, moon-flowering herbs. "They're beautiful," he said, coming to stand beside her. The 2 years had erased the awkward space that once existed between them, replacing it with a comfortable, easy silence. "They only open when the moon is full," she replied, her voice soft as the petals she was inspecting. "Ino says their properties are strongest then. Something about absorbing the moon's chakra." He looked at her, her profile outlined in the soft, silver light of the full moon, and the simple, profound truth of his feelings for her settled over him, warm and solid as the hearth downstairs. He reached out and gently took her hand. Her fingers, usually tending to herbs or poised in a gentle fist stance, curled around his. "Hinata," he began, his voice a little rough. He didn't need to finish. She turned to him, her pale, luminous eyes holding his. And in their depths, he saw the same quiet, certain truth reflected back at him. She rose on her toes, and he leaned down, and their lips met in a kiss that was not a spark, but a slow, deep ember. A culmination of 2 years of unspoken understanding and a lifetime of quiet devotion. It was a promise of a future, a moment of perfect, fragile peace. And then the world went silent. It wasn't a lack of sound. The crickets in the garden abruptly stopped chirping. The distant murmur of the village nightlife ceased. It was a heavy, profound absence of sound, as if the entire world were holding its breath. A crushing pressure descended upon the village, a spiritual weight that made the very air feel thick and hard to breathe. Naruto and Hinata broke apart, their hands instinctively flying to their weapon pouches. Below them, the lights in the hearth flickered and died. Throughout the village, every light, every flame, every spark of chakra suddenly dimmed. TWO figures descended from the moonlit sky. They did not fly. They simply drifted down with the unnatural, leisurely grace of falling ash. One was a hulking brute, a giant of a man with chalk-white skin and a single, sharp horn. His movements radiating a sense of immense, physical power. The other was slighter, more elegant, with the same pale skin, a pair of horns curling from his head, and Rinnegan eyes that glowed with a cold, violet light. He held his hands out, palms up, as if tasting the very air. They were Momoshiki and Kinshiki Otsutsuki. They did not land in front of the Hokage Tower. They did not land in the main plaza. They landed with a soft, soundless touch on the street directly in front of the hearth. "So," Momoshiki said, his voice a bored, aristocratic whisper that carried WITH unnatural clarity in the crushing silence. "This is the source of the aroma." He took a slow, deliberate sniff, a connoisseur sampling a rare vintage. "It is rustic, primal, but the undertones, tea, potential for flavor, it is exquisite." Kinshiki remained silent, a loyal, titanic guard, his gaze sweeping over the building. The doors to the hearth burst open. Ino, Tenten, and Sakura spilled out, kunai in hand, their faces grim. From the surrounding rooftops, shadows moved. Kakashi, his Sharingan already blazing. Might Guy, his body thrumming with contained power. A dozen of Konoha's finest jonin. Tsunade herself landed in the center of the street, cracking the cobblestones beneath her feet, her face a mask of cold fury. "You are trespassing on Konoha's soil," she boomed, her voice the RST sound to break the oppressive silence. "State your purpose, or be destroyed." Momoshiki deigned to look at her, a flicker of mild annoyance in his Rinnegan. "A cage. How quaint." He waved a dismissive hand. "We are not here for your dying world's chakra fruit. That is a peasant's meal. We are here for the main course." His cold, violet gaze lifted, passing over the assembled shinobi as if they were insects, and fixed on Naruto, who had just landed beside Tsunade, Hinata at his side. "We have followed a most intriguing scent across the barren fields of lesser worlds," Momoshiki continued, his tone conversational. "A flavor of pure, untamed life force, of emotional truth so potent it resonates through the void. A delicacy we have never before encountered." He smiled, a thin, predatory expression. "We have come to harvest the spice." The meaning was chillingly clear. They weren't here for the 9 tails. They were here for him. For his gift. Jiraiya's warning, a distant, half-believed prophecy, came crashing into reality. He was a dinner bell. "You're not touching him," Hinata said, her voice low and steady as she fell into a gentle fist stance. Momoshiki chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "The ingredients are feisty, Kinshiki. Prepare the appetizers." The battle was not a battle. It was a slaughter. Kinshiki moved, a blur of white and red. He swung a massive, chakra-forged axe. Tsunade met the blow head-on, her monstrous strength shattering the ground for 50 yards in every direction. For a split second, she held him. Then, with a casual grunt, Kinshiki applied more pressure. And Tsunade was thrown back like a broken doll, skidding through the wall of a building. Might Guy opened the 6th gate, a whirlwind of emerald energy, and unleashed his daytime tiger. The blast, powerful enough to level a small mountain, hit Kinshiki directly. When the dust cleared, the Otsutsuki stood there, his robes slightly singed, his expression one of mild irritation. Ninjutsu was even more useless. Kakashi unleashed a Reikiri, the lightning blade that could cut through anything, but Momoshiki simply held out his right hand, the Rinnegan on his palm glowing. The jutsu was swallowed whole, absorbed without a trace. Such crude seasoning, Momoshiki sighed. He held out his left hand, and a Reikiri 5 times more powerful than Kakashi's erupted from it, forcing the copy ninja to teleport away to avoid being vaporized. He absorbs ninjutsu and fires it back amplified. Sakura yelled, her medical training giving way to pure tactical analysis. Taijutsu only. Focus on the big one. But their taijutsu was a child's game to Kinshiki. The coordinated attacks of the Jonin were brushed aside like cobwebs. This wasn't a difference in skill. It was a difference in existence. They were fighting gods. Naruto felt a cold dread seize him. He watched as his friends, the most powerful people he knew, were dismissed with contemptuous ease. He felt the 9 tails chakra boiling within him, but he knew, instinctively, that it wouldn't be enough. They weren't trying to extract the beast. They looked at him with the detached interest of a chef inspecting a prime cut of meat. The flavor is strongest in this one, Momoshiki noted, his gaze fixed on Naruto. It has been cultivated, allowed to mature. He took a step forward. That was the moment Naruto's clan moved as one. They knew they couldn't win. Their goal was simpler, to buy time. 8 trigrams, 64 palms. Hinata was a blur, her hand striking Kinshiki's massive form, not trying to injure him, but to disrupt the chakra network they could see. Her strikes landed, but it was like hitting a mountain of solid iron. Twin rising dragons. Tenten unsealed a dozen massive scrolls at once. A maelstrom of explosive tags, giant shuriken, and weighted chains filled the air, a wall of steel and fire between Momoshiki and Naruto. Momoshiki simply raised an eyebrow as his Rinnegan absorbed the explosions, a small, bored sigh escaping his lips. But it was a distraction. Ino, Naruto yelled. He didn't need to explain. Ino's hands were already flying through seals. He turned and sprinted back into the ruins of his kitchen. He needed to cook. Inside, the air was thick with dust. He ignored the shattered pots and broken tables. He dove for a small, reinforced chest under the main counter. Inside were his most precious ingredients. But he bypassed them all, grabbing a small, sealed container. It held a paste he had been working on, a hyper-concentrated extract of the most potent glimmer shrooms and chakra orchids. Mixed with a binding agent of pure, chakra-infused honey. He had intended to use it a drop at a time as a powerful medicinal supplement. He poured a massive amount of his own chakra into the container. His hands glowing with golden light. He wasn't just adding energy, he was adding intent. He poured in the warmth of his kiss with Hinata, the pride he felt for his friends, the fierce, protective love he had for his village. He condensed a lifetime of feeling into one, impossibly dense morsel. The paste in the container began to glow with the intensity of a miniature sun. Outside, his friends were being broken. Kinshiki grabbed Tenten's chains and yanked her from the sky, slamming her into the ground. Hinata was on her last legs, her arms bruised and trembling. Ino was bleeding from the nose. The psychic strain of coordinating their failing defense pushing her to her limits. Just as Kinshiki raised a chakra blade to finish Hinata, Naruto reappeared in the doorway. "Hey," he roared, holding up the glowing container. "You want flavor. You want a delicacy." He molded the glowing paste into a single, dense pill, no bigger than his thumb. It pulsed with a light that seemed to bend the air around it. "Come and get it." He hurled the flavor bomb, not at them, but high into the air, away from the village center. Momoshiki's bored expression vanished, replaced by one of pure, unrestrained avarice. The aroma, the sheer sensory potency coming from that tiny pill, was overwhelming. It was the most exquisite thing he had ever encountered. The raw chakra fruit of 1,000 worlds was tasteless ash compared to this. He and Kinshiki abandoned the fight instantly, moving with blinding speed, streaking after the glowing morsel like starving wolves after a scrap of meat. They caught it in midair, and Momoshiki, with a look of ecstatic reverence, popped it into his mouth. There was no explosion. There was something far worse. An eruption of pure sensation. The taste was the joy of 1,000 births. The sorrow of 1,000 deaths. The warmth of every lover's embrace. The cold of every final breath. It was the concentrated, unfiltered taste of life itself. For a being who only consumed, who only took. The sheer generative, emotional power of the flavor was a poison. It was an agony of pure ecstasy that overloaded every sense, every nerve, every pathway in their alien minds. Momoshiki screamed, a high, piercing wail of pleasure and pain so profound it was indistinguishable. Kinshiki staggered back, clutching his head, felled by the psychic backlash of his master's sensory overload. They were vulnerable, distracted, for a precious few seconds. But no one was in any condition to attack. The wave of sensation passed. Momoshiki stood panting, his body trembling, a thin trickle of blood from his nose. He looked down at the battered shinobi of Konoha, and then at Naruto, his eyes no longer holding boredom, but a chilling, obsessive hunger. He licked a drop of blood from his lip, savoring the lingering aftertaste of the flavor bomb. A charming appetizer, he whispered, his voice raspy with a newfound, terrible desire. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to Kinshiki. The quality is confirmed. It is not yet ripe. We will allow it to mature. And with that, they were enveloped in a swirling vortex of black energy and vanished, the crushing pressure on T. He village lifting as if it had never been there. They left behind a ruined street, a dozen critically wounded shinobi, and a silence filled with a new and terrible understanding. Naruto stood in the wreckage of his kitchen, looking at his injured friends, at the fear in his village's eyes. His gift was not just a tool for healing and connection. It was a beacon, and the things it had summoned from the dark were coming back. Momoshiki's final words echoed in the silence, a promise that was more terrifying than any threat. We will return for the main course. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The Last Supper. The Land of Iron was a nation of stark, white peaks and unnervingly quiet samurai. It was a land of neutrality, its political climate as cold and sterile as its snow-covered landscape. It was here, in a stark, circular chamber, that the emergency cage summit convened. The air was thick with the tension of 5 simmering pots threatening to boil over. Beings who consume worlds. The fourth Raikage slammed his fist on the stone table, the sound a thunderclap of disbelief. This is the fantasy of a madman, Tsunade. You drag us from our villages, at a time of immense unrest, for a ghost story. My village is in ruins. My finest jonin are in the infirmary. My own strength was brushed aside like dust. Tsunade's voice was a low, dangerous growl. This was no ghost. This was a god, and it treated us like livestock. Even if this tale is true, Kuretsuchi, the young and sharp-tongued Tsuchikage, interjected, her arms crossed, it sounds like a Konoha problem. These beings were drawn to your Jinchuriki. This is the consequence of the tailed beasts you have hoarded for generations. Mei Terumi, her expression troubled, was the only one who seemed to be giving the story its due weight. I have seen Naruto Uzumaki's power firsthand. It is unconventional. The idea that it could attract this kind of attention is not as far-fetched as it sounds. Gaara, the cage, remained silent, his arms crossed. His teal eyes unreadable. He had felt the shift in the world, the oppressive silence that had fallen. He had also felt the lingering, peaceful memory of the silence in his own mind. The one Naruto had gifted him in the forest. He knew the boy was a source of miracles. He did not doubt he could be a source of calamities as well. The debate raged, a storm of political posturing and deeply ingrained mistrust. They were not allies. They were rivals, forced into a room, each trying to calculate the risk to their own nation. The summit was on the verge of collapse, a failure that would doom them all. The heavy doors to the chamber swung open. A samurai guard moved to intercept, then froze, his hand on the hilt of his katana. Naruto Uzumaki walked in. He was not alone. Flanking him were Hinata and Ino. Their expressions calm and resolute. Behind them stood Tenten and Sakura, a silent, unbreachable wall of loyalty. They had not been invited. Their presence was a statement in itself. The cage fell silent, stunned by the audacity. You are not permitted here, Genin, the Raikage boomed. Naruto's eyes met his, and there was no fear, no childish bravado. There was only a calm, weary certainty. I am the culinary sage of Konoha, he said, his voice quiet but echoing with a new authority. And this is my problem. Which means it's all of our problems. He walked to the center of the table. He wasn't here to debate politics or beg for aid. He was here to make them understand. From a simple pouch at his hip, he produced 5 small, identical plates. On each plate was a single, stark white morsel. It looked like a piece of compressed mochi, but it had no scent. It radiated a profound, unsettling coldness. Since the attack, I've been trying to understand what they are, Naruto said. His gaze sweeping over the cage. I couldn't replicate the taste of my friend's courage, or my village's hope. So I tried to replicate them. He placed a plate before each cage. I can't explain the threat to you. Words aren't enough, so you'll have to taste it for yourselves. The cage stared at the strange, cold offering. It was a moment of supreme trust or supreme foolishness. Gaara, ever the one to walk a new path, was the first to act. He picked up the morsel and ate it. The others, their curiosity and a sense of shared gravity overcoming their caution, followed suit. The taste was not a flavor. It was an absence. It was the taste of a star dying, its light and heat swallowed into nothingness. It was the flavor of a void, of a silence that was not peaceful but absolute. There was no vision, no memory. There was only a feeling, a direct, unfiltered injection of the Otsutsuki's nature into their souls. It was the sensation of a hunger so vast and so ancient it considered galaxies to be mere appetizers. It was the chilling, irrefutable truth that to these beings, they were not enemies, not rivals, not even sentient. They were food, and they were on the menu. The Raikage recoiled, his hand flying to his throat as if to choke out the awful sensation. Kuretsuchi went pale, her usual bravado stripped away, leaving only a raw, primal fear. Mei's eyes were wide with horror. Gaara sat perfectly still, but a single bead of cold sweat traced a path down his temple. In that single, shared moment of existential terror, the 5 Kage were united in a way decades of war and peace treaties never could. The bickering was over. The game had changed. What do we do? Kuretsuchi whispered, her voice trembling. We fight, Naruto said. But not on their terms. We can't beat them with ninjutsu. It's like trying to put out a fire with oil. They just consume it. He looked at them, the spark of a wild, impossible idea in his eyes. Their strength is their appetite. So we're going to turn it into their weakness. We're going to spoil the meal. He laid out his plan. It was the grandest, most insane culinary project ever conceived. He would create a world-spanning dish. A ritual on a global scale that would infuse the planet's entire chakra network, its very life force, with his own signature. I will create a flavor, he explained, his voice ringing with conviction. The flavor of defiance, of a will too stubborn to break, of a billion lives interconnected, each one unique and precious. It will be a flavor so complex, so full of life, that to their sterile, consuming palates, it will be a poison. We will make this entire world inedible. The quest was the beginning of the legend. The 5 great shinobi nations, for the first time in history, moved as one. It was a desperate, thrilling race against an unknown clock. In the rocky, windswept peaks of the land of Earth, Kuritsuchi led a team of her most powerful Iwa nin into the Earth's very core. With them was Tenten, her scrolls now filled with diamond-tipped drills and resonance hammers of her own design. They bypassed the ancient, slumbering Earth elementals, not by fighting, but by using Tenten's tools to create a harmonic frequency that soothed the guardians into a deeper slumber. From the heart of a geode the size of a house, they claimed the sunstone, a crystal that pulsed with the warm, steady energy of a contained dawn. In the deep, dark waters beneath Kurigakure, Mei and a team of her finest hunter nin, guided by Hinata's Byakugan piercing through the oppressive darkness, navigated a treacherous underwater labyrinth. They found the sacred spring, a place of profound silence, and from its center, they retrieved the heart tear of the first Mizukage, a single, perfect sphere of water that would not mix with any other, holding within it the collective sorrow and resilience of the land of water. In the land of lightning, where the storms never ceased, A and his brother, Killer B, ascended the highest mountain. They faced the lightning itself. As the heavens unleashed their fury, Sakura Haruno stood beside them. When the final, massive bolt struck the peak, forging the cloud iron, it was her monstrous strength, a perfect fusion of Tsunade's power and her own precise chakra control, that shattered the mountainside, allowing them to claim the jagged, lightning-charged shards of metal. Gaara traveled alone into the deepest part of his desert. He stood in the place where he had once felt most alone, the ancient prison of the one-tailed Shukaku. He reached down, not with his power, but with his hands, and gathered the sand. It was no longer just sand. It was infused with the memory of his pain, his rage, and his profound, world-changing discovery of love and friendship. It was the whispering sand, and it tasted of redemption. The final, most dangerous quest was in their own backyard. In the darkest, most twisted part of Konoha's forest of death, where the malevolent chakra of the god tree's ancient battle still lingered. Kakashi and a newly returned Sasuke Uchiha, his eyes now holding a grim understanding of the worldly threat, stood guard. It was Ino who was the key. She did not search with her eyes. She sat in a meditative trance, extending her consciousness, her senses sifting through the layers of dark energy until she found it. A single, gnarled root, pulsing with a faint divine light. With the utmost care, they tapped its core, drawing a single, golden drop of the sap of the god tree's last root. The night before the ritual, with tea, legendary ingredients secured and the world holding its breath, the hearth was quiet. The doors were closed for the first time in 2 years. Inside, a single table was set for 5. Naruto placed the last dish on the table. There were no visions, no power-ups. It was a simple meal. Perfectly grilled fish, steamed rice, a light, clear soup, and pickled vegetables from their rooftop garden. It was the first meal he had ever cooked with no other intent than to say thank you. He sat with them, Hinata, Ino, Sakura, Tenten. The women who had been the first to believe in him, who had built this sanctuary with him, who had stood before gods for him. I don't know what happens tomorrow, Naruto said, his voice quiet, stripped of all its usual bravado. Or if this will even work. But I couldn't have done any of it without you. Sakura smiled, a genuine, tear-bright expression. You showed me I was more than just a fangirl, Naruto. You showed me my weapons had a soul, Tenten added, her voice thick with emotion. Ino raised her cup of tea. You showed me the map of the world, and then you gave me the courage to help you redraw it." Hinata simply reached across the table and placed her hand on his. Her touch said everything that words could not. They ate in a comfortable, poignant silence, the simple flavors of the food a reminder of the life they had built, a life they were now fighting to protect. It was a quiet farewell to the peace they had earned, a final, shared breath before the plunge. This was their last supper, a final communion of the clan forged in a small, lonely kitchen, now poised to save the world. The sun rose on a world transformed. A vast, intricate web of seals, drawn by the finest seal masters from all 5 nations, pulsed with a soft, blue light. It stretched out from Konoha, connecting to massive ritual sites in stone, mist, cloud, and sand, where the cage and their shinobi stood ready. At the epicenter, in the center of the battered but defiant Konoha, stood Naruto. Before him was a massive cauldron, forged from the cloud iron by Tenten's own hands. Inside, the legendary ingredients rested, waiting. Naruto took a deep, steadying breath, placing his hands on the cool metal of the cauldron. He closed his eyes, reaching out not with his chakra, but with his heart, feeling the web of seals, the waiting cage, the thrumming, anxious life force of the entire planet. Now, he roared. From the 5 great nations, a pillar of pure chakra, the combined will of millions, shot into the sky and converged above Konoha. The massive wave of energy descended, funneling into the cauldron. The ingredients ignited. The sunstone released a gentle dawn. The heart tear wept a mist of pure emotion. The whispering sand sang a song of lonely hope. The sap pulsed with the memory of creation itself. Naruto poured all of himself into the mixture, his own chakra the final, binding agent. An aroma began to rise from the cauldron. It was a scent that carried on the wind. A flavor that seeped into the very soil, into the water, into the air itself. It was the smell of a meal fit for a world. And in the cold, silent void above, the dinner bell had rung. The sky tore open. It was not a cloud, not a storm. It was a wound in the fabric of reality. From the gaping, black maw, a fleet of Otsutsuki ships, pale and bone-like, emerged, drawn by the irresistible, world-spanning scent of the ultimate feast. At their head was Momoshiki, his rinnegan glowing with a triumphant, ravenous hunger. Naruto opened his eyes. He looked up at the descending horde, at the god who had come to consume his world. He was not a Jinchuriki. He was not a genin. He was a chef. And the meal was almost ready. The final battle, the battle for the flavor of the world, was about to begin. Chapter 10 End.